Welcome to the San Ramon Valley Unified School District's Board of Education. We want to let the public know that we are video recording this meeting and it will be live streamed on our YouTube channel. And I'll call this meeting to order. And we will start with attendance. Travis?
Hello, everyone. I'm Travis Hodges. I'm the student trustee on the SRVUSD Board of Education. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Hurd. I represent Trustee Area 5.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jesse Van Zee, and I represent Area 1.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm the trustee for representing Area 4.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shelley Clark. I represent Area 2.
And I'm Laura Brett and I represent Area 3. All right, so next we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance and I'm going to ask our student board member Travis Hodges to lead us. All right, so next is reporting out on actions taken and closed, and there were no actions taken and closed. And so I'm going to take a moment to review how public comment works during our board public meetings. We do have a public meeting and then we're shifting to a workshop. So if you would like to make a comment during the meeting, you can find yellow speaker cards. They look like these at that back table there. And please ask a staff member if you have any questions. Each speaker has a time limit of 3 minutes with a timer shown on the screen while you are speaking. This time limit will be enforced to ensure fairness. Please be aware that we may interrupt you and redirect your comment to the correct time to speak if your comment relates to a different agendized item or if it is not within our jurisdiction. And I reserve the right as president to announce the last call for speaker cards. I usually announce that after the report's been given and before we start public comment. The views expressed during public comment are those of the individual speaker. The absence of a response from the board or district staff does not imply agreement. The district believes in an inclusive, welcoming, and safe environment during its meetings for all in our community. Please be mindful that students are in the room and watching virtually. We are all here to support them and to support their educational experience. And thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your engagement, and it's really what makes this district great. So we will move to public comment for non-agendized items. And again, this is items that are not part of, not currently on our agenda. So if anyone has any comments about the budget, that is agendized. So that would be moved to when we take public comment for that. So I have, I think, 4 cards. If when I call your name, you realize that in fact it is about the budget, just let me know and we'll move you over to that agendized item. So we first have Michelle Dooner. Okay. So it's a budget item. Okay. And then we have Dia Mundell. Okay. Cheryl Weicker, Jen Georges. Okay. Rochelle Goldenberg, budget. Okay. And then Kelly Ryan. Okay. All right. Okay. So that was easy-ish because next hard-ish. So now we need a motion 8.0 agenda approval. Can I get a motion to accept the agenda?
I make a motion to accept the agenda as submitted.
Second.
The motion was made by Board Member Clark and seconded by Board Member Hurd. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
All right, so now we'll move to action items, public hearings, 9.0, annual organization of the board, 9.1, oath of officers, and Susanna Ordway will be conducting the oath. And I believe we are asked to stand.
Yeah.
So are we going to do this in front of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead. Okay. So please raise your hand, right hand. Please repeat after me. I, and please state your name, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter. Congratulations.
Make my kids come up to the front. Thank you for indulging us with our families.
So I
Oh.
just wanted to take a point of personal privilege at this point in the meeting and to present our outgoing president, who has done an incredible job over the last year. This is from all of us on the board. And I have this necklace and I want to read this to you because I think it describes perfectly who you are. Not that you're a tree, though. Just like a tree, this necklace symbolizes strength, stability, growth qualities that you embody every day. Your leadership and support have nurtured our team, helping us to thrive. Thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you. I have to say, just being president this last year, I've grown so much. I've learned so much from all of you. And I'm just grateful to my voters and to the whole district for allowing me to sit in this seat, because it's been something that has really enriched me in a way and fulfilled me in a way that I hadn't thought possible before I was on the school board. So thank you. And thank you to every single student that I've been able to engage with and meet and speak with, and parents and staff. And it's the students, man, that fill my heart in a way that I hadn't expected until I was on the board. So thank you. All right, so now we have our election of officers. So I guess and I'm running this part, right? Yes. So can I get a nomination for president?
I would like to nominate Shelley Clark to be our next president.
I'll second that.
The motion was made by Board Member Hurd and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges?
Aye.
Board Member Hurd?
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee?
Aye.
Board Member Ordway?
Aye.
Board Member Clark?
I, of course.
Board Member Bratt?
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
All right, so now I turn the meeting over to the new president. I assume we stay in our seats though, and then the next meeting is when we move. So Shelley, take it away.
So May I have a nomination for vice president?
I'll nominate Susanna Ordway for vice president.
I'll second.
The motion was made by Board Member Bratton, seconded by Board Member Hurd. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
The great part where you can vote for you.
I know.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
And may I have a nomination for clerk?
I nominate Jessie Van Zee for clerk.
I'll second.
The motion was made by Board Member Ordway and seconded by Board Member Bratt. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
The rotation
now-
thing is just so civilized.
Yeah.
It's amazing when you're at CSBA, you hear stuff and it's like, wow. So thank you guys.
So now we're at 9.2, consideration of approval of certification of signatures. So Mr. Hellman.
Thank you. Each year, school districts are required to adopt a new certification of signatures resolution. This certification verifies the signatures of the members of the governing board and the signatures of persons authorized to sign orders drawn on the funds in the school district, notices of employment, and contracts. These certifications are made in accordance with the provisions of Education Code 42632, 42633, and 44843. The administration recommends approval of the certification of signatures, and I turn it back to you.
And do we have any questions from trustees? Any public comments?
We do not.
Okay, so may I have a motion to approve item 9.2?
I'll make a motion to approve item 9.2.
Second. Oh, Susanna, you can have it.
Motion was made by Board Member Bratt and seconded by Board Member Ordway. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, that concludes our board meeting. We are now going to move to the workshop portion of our agenda. So I need a motion to accept the board workshop agenda.
Make a motion to approve the board workshop agenda.
I'll second.
Motion was made by Board Member Van Zee and seconded by Board Member Bratt. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
So now we're going to go into the board workshop and the budget 12.1 budget reduction plan, and that would be our superintendent, CJ Kamick.
Thank you very much, Trustee Clark. As we're pulling up the presentation, I just want to make a few opening remarks and then I will walk through the presentation and the budget reduction plan. I think it's kind of goes without saying, but I would like to highlight that this is a very somber and sad list of reductions. I acknowledge that the reductions proposed will have a negative impact on our students, on our staff, and our community. This is not why I became a fifth grade teacher and became a principal and chose to serve as a superintendent. This is not what I want to do for any organization, and you won't hear me defend the list of recommendations presented tonight as something that I think is good for kids, and it's not something that I think is good for staff. But in order to reach a positive budget certification, we do need to make at least $24 million of reductions. I also want to acknowledge that we had a budget advisory committee and we sent out a community survey. And some of the reductions included in my plan tonight go against some of the feedback from those groups. And it's not because I'd like to intentionally ignore the feedback received. In large part, it is because if we reduce by $24 million, it will create a situation where in less than 12 months, we will have cut $37.5 million out of the district budget. So other decisions that could have been made have previously been made for what we might describe as low-hanging fruit. We are at the place now where we are not taking bites out of the apple, we're taking bites out of the core of the apple. So there's a number of difficult decisions in front of us. I do believe we will emerge from this. It will be painful. We will look different as an organization when we emerge through this. And I am confident in the team that we have on the board, and I am confident in the collaboration that we can have with our labor partners to navigate our way through this. I do want to highlight that this is not an action item tonight, so the board is not asked to make decisions on the reduction list tonight. This is an information item and discussion item only. And so with that, it is with a heavy heart that I'll turn to the presentation and review some of the information for context, which some of you may know. Some of you may see this as new information, and then we'll move to the reduction list. If you could move to the next slide, please, Tammy. So as I already mentioned, I'm not going to read the whole slide to you. I think it is important to note that with $24 million of reductions, this will be 37.5 million in less than 12 months. And I don't think that that can be underscored. This slide also highlights the need for reductions, which I'll cover. I also just want to outline the process. So this tonight is information, and we'll come back to the board for the 14th, on the 14th of January, in hopes that at that meeting, we'll be able to make a decision on reductions for the district. The reason for this to start now is because if any reductions take place that require a person to lose their position, they need to be notified of that under the law by March 15th. Historically, classified positions required a 60-day notice. In the last few years, that law has changed, and now all personnel who work for a school district are required to receive that notice by March 15th. Additionally, we have an obligation to negotiate many of these decisions and or the effects of these decisions. And we need time for that process as well. So if the board makes a decision in January, we would come back with what we call a PKS, a particular kind of service reduction, likely in the February meeting, which is an action required before we move to March 15th notices. So there is a lot of work in front of us. And that's why you'll see districts across the state and the Bay Area that are making budget cuts right now, having these discussions in December and January. The next page, please, Tammy. I just want to talk for a moment about the local control funding formula. Many of us understand it, and some of us understand it in part. I think the most important thing to note is when LCFF was implemented back in 2014 by Governor Brown in his second term as governor, it was abundantly clear and vocalized many places that the LCFF funding model would place a significant burden on affluent districts to cover the difference in funding between districts that were receiving more to support students who had more intensive needs. And while I think there are many positive intentions of the local control funding formula, after a decade of implementation, I think there are a number of systemic problems that are also realized. And I think we are a prime example of that. We are extremely successful as a district. I think we have a long history of good governance and strong leadership and excellent staff and amazing students. We're one of the highest achieving districts in the Bay Area and the state historically. But where we fall under LCFF funding places us, and if somebody's doing the research, I want to give some qualifiers to this. If you look at all the districts in the state, and you take out the County Office of Educations and the charter schools, there's about 933 districts left across the state. And we rank in the bottom 4th percentile of what we receive in LCFF funding. So that creates a very significant challenge for us upfront, in large part because a bulk of the funding for LCFF is related to your unduplicated students, your students who are second language learners, socioeconomically disadvantaged, or foster youth and homeless. As a reminder, they're referred to as unduplicated by the state because if you have a student who is, for example, a foster youth and a second language learner, they cannot be counted twice in the funding formula. They're counted once. Our unduplicated percentage is about 10%. Districts that have a much higher percentage receive a significant increase in funding. And that's highlighted a little bit on the next slide, please, if you would, Tammy. When you look at this chart, it may be hard to see for the audience. I apologize, but on my page, it's orange. Up there, it's I don't know what we call it, red. That is the bulk of where 90% of our students fall in that funding level. And only 10% of our students fall in the next shorter block. Districts that have significantly higher unduplicated percentages are receiving all of that funding, the entire bar. And so what that looks like in practice for us, if you go to the next slide, please, Tammy. And I want to qualify that this is 22-23 data, and this is pulled from eddata.org. This is the last set of data that's gone through the full clearing process and been published on eddata.org. When you look at this chart is sorted by the far right column, total general revenues per student. And you can see that we're second from the bottom in the county. Now, the numbers have changed since 22, 23, but the trend hasn't. And if you look at the districts on the page, you'll identify that West Contra Costa and Pittsburgh Unified are districts that have a much higher unduplicated percentage. And if you look at the LCFF dollars per student, you can see they receive significantly more funding than we do per student. Other districts that are higher on the list, Acalanes and Lafayette, for example, they stay high on that list because of their other local revenue per student. And I don't want to discredit the generosity of our community for passing Measure Q and the local donations that happen through the foundation and our ed funds. But despite that tremendous and generous support, districts that stay on the top end of this funding model have a substantially different local funding system than we do. As an example, when you look at Mount Diablo's total general fund revenue per student at just over 16,000 in this given year of 22-23, and you look at San Ramon's number, the difference there may not seem that astonishing, but when you think about it across 28,600 students, by my calculation, if we got the same level of funding as Mount Diablo, we'd have about $66 million more in our ongoing revenue year over year. You can move to the next slide, please, Tammy. Another significant factor impacting our current financial position is declining enrollment. And there's a lot of narratives that exist for why we're in declining enrollment. I think the narrative that needs to be held most true is twofold. People are leaving the state in a rate more than they have historically. I think last year was the first year where the state population leveled off after previous years being the first time that the state population actually declined. Underscoring that is that we are still at historically low rates for birth rates. And that is the primary driver. And this is a small section from School Services in an article they published recently, which I won't read to you, but it does highlight that the state has lost almost 6.3% of their students. That's 400,000 students. And if the trends hold over the next 10 years, that would put us at about 10.7 across the state. And that's about 620,000 students across the state. Excuse me. In addition to declining enrollment, a significant factor for us is federal funding. Our funding from the federal government makes up about 2% of our revenue. That funding under the federal government is predominantly under IDEA and some small title funds. It is important to note, and my personal belief, as I've shared with many, being a former director of special ed and having a student sister with significant special needs, we should and must continue to provide adequate programs for our special education students. It is unequivocally the right thing for us to do. However, the federal government made a promise when they instituted the federal laws for special education that they would fund it at 40%. And if you look back historically, you can identify that even at the time, members of the federal government, including the president, were concerned about implementing the law because they didn't ever think they'd get to 40% of the funding. In my entire career over 20 years, I've never seen it above 15%. Right now, it hovers around 8 to 9%. The data on the screen is from 23-24. And so that means that we contribute about 51% of our costs for special education programs from our general fund. And that's from our LCFF dollars. Those were not the dollars that were designed to deliver special education services. And if you think about the federal government providing the 40% that they've promised that they would provide under special education laws at the federal level, you can see that would be over $20 million of ongoing revenue to the district, if not more. On the next slide, I want to move a little bit towards expenses. And we are a people business. Our job is to serve students. And that's why it's reasonable that most districts in the state have anywhere between 85 to 88% of their costs going to personnel. We're in that same ballpark. We're about 83, 84% of our general education fund, our general fund, going to salaries and benefits. So on the slide, you can see a bit of the breakdown. We're about 2,800 employees as an organization. And our certificated staff makes up about 67.5% of that, our certificated non-management staff. Our classified CSEA staff make up about 19.3% of our personnel costs. Our SEIU classified staff make up about 9.3%, and our management team makes up about 8%. So when we look at our personnel costs, we're looking at salary, benefits, and total obligations. And that's the breakdown of how our personnel expenses are provided across the district to the service of students. When you look at the expense side continuing, what we see on the next page is what's happened in recent years since 2019-20. You can see we've had about a 10% decrease in our enrollment in San Ramon Valley Unified, which is a pretty significant decline rate. In the next column, you see certificated non-management staff. Over this time period from 2019 to 2025, we've added about 7.6% staff. It's important to consider why we've added staff in all areas. I think many people will understand and recall that in the pandemic and post-pandemic, we received significant funding for the purpose of providing additional staffing. In some cases, there were grants provided that mandated we hired paraeducators, for example. There were provisions that we could not lay off staff during the pandemic. Also to note in this column, the amount of certificated non-management staff added as a percentage is lower than the other groups. But you do note in 23-24 and 24-25 a significant drop off of staffing in that year for our certificated non-management staff. In the classified non-management ranks, we increased staffing by about 9.5%, and in the management ranks about 9.1%, 9.2%. So we look at the fact that if we've added staff and these one-time dollars are going away, there is a reason that we need to adjust our staffing and make some of the significant reductions. However, it's not just the one-time dollars going away. A lot of people have asked me, CJ, why are we in this position as a district? And it's a combination of things that kind of create the perfect storm. Declining enrollment is a significant factor. Having San Ramon be in the bottom 4% of all districts in the state for LCFF funding is a significant factor. And then you combine that with the one-time dollars from COVID going away. All of those kind of align to create the perfect storm. On this page, I want to make one thing very clear. I firmly believe that we as a district should be doing everything we can to address compensation for our employees, both from a salary and a health benefits standpoint. It's critically important in terms of recruitment and retention, I think, as we all know and understand. The job market is more intense in terms of difficulty than I've ever seen it in 20 plus years in education. Anywhere from paras to child nutrition staff, to bus drivers, to maintenance, to custodial, to classroom teachers, to special ed, to management. It is a really tough job market to hire people. And so I think we need to pay a special attention to our compensation levels across the district. What this chart highlights is, I think, something that we just need to be mindful of, which is if we want to continue to do that, which would include offering salary increases in the future and continuing to cover Kaiser benefit costs, then we have to look at systemically changing our budget in a few ways. The chart highlights from 1920 to 24-25, with 24-25 not being decided, about a 21% ongoing increase and a 3% one-time increase in wages and salary. And the other significant portion is the increase in health and welfare benefits. So if you look at our health and welfare benefits as a total cost of benefits, it's gone up almost 30% in that same time period. So I think while I want to underscore the importance of us trying to address total compensation for our employees in a very important way, we also have to recognize the disconnect between being in the bottom 4th percentile of funding for the state under LCFF and trying to remain near the top or above average for total compensation. It kind of creates a fundamental flaw in the system. And I think we need to be mindful of that as we move forward and how we continue to try and address those needs for our employees, given the tight labor market and the increasing cost of living in the Bay Area. So moving to the budget reduction list, I recognize it's hard to see on the screen in front of you, and for our audience, I apologize. This is published on our website, and there were one or two errors found in the sheet that I will review today, and an updated copy has been presented on our website. Additionally, on our website, you'll see a place where we are putting up frequently asked questions about the budget reduction plan. So the first page is program adjustments and reductions in budget actions. I will walk through them relatively quickly, and then when we turn to public comment and board discussion, I'd be happy to answer additional questions. So the first line item is reducing school site travel budgets by 10%, followed by reducing school site budgets by 10%. In proposing to our endowment and the Ed Foundation to continue covering 4 sections of our interdisciplinary program. Currently, that's taking place as a pilot at Doherty Valley High School. Moving 2 student routes back to our transportation drivers. Charging warehouse positions to child nutrition funds because there are some employees there that deal with child nutrition. It would be appropriate allocation of funding to come out of Fund 13. Pausing textbook adoptions, terminating contracts for incident command for schools. Reducing our COGAT batteries, the testing, the initial and retesting, eliminating our Safe School Ambassadors program, eliminating our preliminary administrative services credential leadership program. I do want to clarify one of the line items here, eliminating the PSAT, SAT, and ACT. So that is not something that we are attempting to eliminate access to our students. It is redesigning how we handle the financial side of that. So I want to make clear, because I've received a number of questions about our students not having access to that. I do believe that we will continue to have access to that for our students. We just need to restructure some of the financial side of that. As an example, to offer our PSAT program, it's just over about $60,000 a year in cost, in part because we run that on Saturday. There are districts that navigate offering the PSAT during the instructional day, during the instructional year. It is remarkably disruptive to a secondary schedule, and I won't pretend that it's not. But there are ways to accomplish access to these with a different financial structure. And so while our community is looking at this either in person or online, I want to clarify that PSATs, SATs, and ACTs for our students are something we see continuing. It would just be restructured financially. Eliminating the culturally responsive learning budget, eliminating the Speak Up and Be Safe program, terminating outside consulting contracts with Hanover, Studer, and AASA, no longer subsidizing fingerprinting costs for new employees. We have a Be a Mentor program that operates right now, and our JPA self-insurance group offers a program called Arbiter, which operates in the same fashion and is free of cost to the district. Continuing the elimination of substitute premium rates, reducing the ESY, extended school year program, which is specific to our special education extended school year program, down to the legally mandated 18 days and 4 hours per day. That would eliminate the summer school intervention TK through 8 program, keeping the credit recovery model in place for high school students. Eliminating instructional software and technology tools, eliminating extra pay for curriculum reps, that is an unrestricted fund. Eliminating extra hours and sub costs for certificated staff and PD, that's a restricted fund. And eliminating extra hours for staff development for ed services, and eliminating WASC expenses. So at the bottom of each page for the budget reductions, you will see a summary calculation. This represents 4.6, I'm rounding, but $4.6 million in reductions and just under 15% of the total reduction plan. Next is the page for management reductions. The first line item is a reduction of the superintendent's work year by 5 days. You'll hear reduction of work year multiple times throughout this proposal. For those who might be wondering what all of that entails, it is the equivalent to furlough days. So it's less salary provided for less days worked. For our non-management employees, those things have to be negotiated. For the management group, it does not. So the proposal is 5 furlough days or a reduction in work year for the superintendent, 4 for the executive cabinet members, 4 for all district office and service center administrators, 3 days for our site administrators, principals and assistant principals, the elimination of the director of communications, family and community engagement position. We would be keeping 2 coordinators in the communications team. Reducing a custodial supervisor, reducing our current 6 ed services coordinator positions by 50%, keeping 3 positions, likely with a restructure with a focus on literacy, a focus on math, and the 3rd position being a little bit of a catch-all or Swiss Army knife for many of the CTE programs and other things that are currently being done by our excellent team of coordinators. The reduction of 2 directors in the Ed Services Division of the district office. That's accomplished through the recommendation to combine the Director of Equity and Student Services position and to collapse the Director of Assessment. The assessment work would be spread through the other directors, and obviously the 2 positions that are combined would combine the work of the Director of Equity and Student Services. Reducing a senior planning and development manager, reducing a senior project manager, and reducing a program supervisor in special education. So for our employee groups, including management, there's a little bit of a different summary that's not present on the first page because the first page doesn't represent a percentage of our personnel costs. So if you recall earlier, I covered that the management team is just over 8% of our total costs for personnel. These recommendations bring management to a 9.24% of the reduction plan. This is the only employee group that has a reduction percentage higher than their current personnel cost percentage. The total savings of the management reductions proposed would be just over $2.8 million. Moving to our SEIU group, and this is one of the pages where a mistake was made. I want to call that out and clarify it here. The first is item is reducing a groundskeeper and maintenance. That would mean 5 positions stay. We currently have 5 vacancies of custodial positions. We'd be reducing 5 additional positions and collapsing the vacancies for a total of 10 FTE. Reducing 1 irrigation specialist in maintenance, 1 maintenance 3 worker, 1 maintenance electrician, 1 maintenance painter, and the proposal to reduce the work year for SEIU employees by 2 days. In the original document published, that said ongoing. It should be one time. And that's consistent with all of the proposed reductions in work years and furlough days. I do want to clarify for the board, the audience, and the public that when we say one time in these proposed budget reductions, it is not something that we're looking at as a 1 year. The one time is intended to categorize the budget cycle of 3 years. As you can imagine, if we looked at all the one-time reductions, and I'll summarize this at the end of my presentation, if we eliminated those for the 25-26 year, and all of those expenses came back into the budget for the 26-27 year, we would no longer have a positive budget certification. So when it says one time, it's really talking about conceptually and acknowledging that these things need to be negotiated. It is really the 3-year budget cycle. If the reduction plan says ongoing, that would be something that we would be looking at not having even beyond the 3-year budget cycle. The other thing I want to call out with furlough days, which may come up as a question, is in order for furlough days to be enacted, the last time they've been talked about significantly in the Bay Area, and I think even in San Ramon, was in the 2008 recession. And if memory serves, I was not here in 2008, but I believe the labor groups negotiated some furlough days here as a response to the recession, and then those were restored. In that time period, we were allowed under the provisions provided by the state to reduce the student instructional year. In this case, we're not. And so there's a few important considerations with furlough days. One is, in order to still obtain a full year of service credit for an employee, the furlough day has to be applied equally to the entire bargaining unit. If not, they will not get a full year of service credit. If the furlough days applied to the entire bargaining unit, then those shortened work years will still receive a full service credit. The other piece to note is, for example, we're on SEIU's page here, but CSEA has 2 units. One is more clerical, one is more paraeducator driven. None of these proposals, acknowledging that they need to be negotiated, would be intended to create furlough days where staff are not present at school with kids. So there's a lot of creativity that will have to happen at the bargaining table to achieve some of these outcomes. And this is also why some of the days proposed for different units are different. Because many of our employees in CSEA in one unit or SEIU, there are a number of employees that work the student year plus a day. And so when we look at 2 days there, it might be something that needs to be looked at in terms of vacation or some other kind of creative arrangement reached through collective bargaining. But I just want to make clear that it is not a proposal to operate school with all of our students there and not have the critically important staff that we need to serve our students. So for SEIU, when we look at the summary, SEIU is about 9.4% of our total personnel costs. They are 5.5% of this reduction plan. The total is just over $1.7 million. Next is the page for our certificated non-management staff, SRVUSD. Moving through this page, there's current funding in place for some elective classes for SDC students. That would be eliminated. The elementary counselor positions that are paid out of pandemic-based funding are being proposed for elimination. That would be sweeping those funds back before their total expiration. The ServTip program, which helps support our new teachers through their teacher induction program, is recommended to be cut down from 2 to 1 FTE. Reducing TSA positions, Sycamore has a 0.5, Venture at a 0.6, and we provide 1.5 FTE for TSA positions across the middle schools. Restructuring the alt ed staffing to match their current enrollment. The total FTE is to be determined, but we believe that savings will be $100,000, if not more. The reduction of 8.2 student support counselors, that would be 4 at middle school and 4.2 at high school. Increasing the class average at elementary by 2, class size ratio at middle school by 2, and class size ratio at high school by 2. The proposal here is a reduction in work year or furlough days for Serbia of 3 days. Increasing the counselor ratios for middle school and high school. Reducing the high school librarians from 6 to 4, leaving 1 librarian per comprehensive high school. Reducing the school psychologist position that's assigned to oversee the Rainbow program. The Rainbow program would stay in place. The paraeducators working to support that program would stay in place, but the oversight that's happening by a school psychologist would be eliminated in that role. And for our social workers, reducing from 9 to 4, keeping enough social workers to staff our wellness centers at high schools. Servia represents about 67.5 of our current personnel costs. They represent 60.13% of this reduction plan. The total from the Servia page is about $18.5 million to $18.6 million, if you're rounding up. Next is the CSEA proposed reductions. And these are lead behaviorist hours for our SEA program. And I just want to speak about our SEA program for a moment. We are seeing a decline in the population for our SEA program, in part because with the implementation of TK and the grades, the ages, not the grades, the ages rolling back, more of our students are being served through that model and less through the SEA program. So there are some places where we will continue to look at where we should adjust staffing to meet the current student and program populations. And that is 5 hours each per week across 2 positions. The reduction of para hours for transition programs, reducing a purchasing specialist position, reducing the communications and admin support specialist position, reducing the budget analyst and ed services position, 2 administrative secretaries in our educational services department, a 0.5 facilities use coordinator, 1 of our HR technicians in human resources, and then downgrading 1 of the administrative secretaries in the HR team to an HR specialist position, reducing a part-time department secretary in maintenance, a reduction of hours in the SEA program across 13 positions, reduction of an info and systems data tech in special ed, reduction of a network specialist position in technology, 3 computer systems tech positions in technology, and a reduction of our 3 FTE in the audio visual area. There are in another unit low voltage techs which are qualified to do similar work. And again, these would be effects bargaining and negotiations that would have to take place. The proposal is a reduction of work year for CSEA members by 2 days. In looking at the summary for this page, CSEA represents about 19.3% of our personnel costs, and they represent 10.14% of these proposed reductions, totaling about $3.1 million. So on the next slide, you can see a bit of the summary, which I've already described of each of the tables. Servia being just over 7% below The reduction plan percentage versus the total personnel costs. CSEA about just over 9% below their percent of the reduction plan versus total personnel costs. SEIU about 3.8% below, and management about 1.2% above. In terms of categorizing things in where we need to be looking, the total furlough days outlined in the entire plan represent about $3.81 million. Another important notation is the challenge that is presented through these budget reductions, which is the reductions that are considered one time or through the life cycle of the 3-year budget make up about $13.4 million of the plan. That means, and I'll get to some comments on this slide next, that we need to continue to think about how we redesign what we do in the district and how we serve our students. Because a $24 million reduction will gain us a positive budget certification, but I can't underscore by what a razor thin margin we are obtaining a positive budget certification. The class size increase proposals or class ratio proposals equate to about $8.17 million of the reduction plan. Counseling reductions equate to about 5.3 million. Specific to secondary counseling, it's about 2.3 million of the reduction plan. And as I shared earlier, the next slide really covers the fact that a lot of these things need to be negotiated. For certificated positions, there's more of a traditional negotiations aspect. For classified reductions, it's classified under the EERA and the collective bargaining laws as effects bargaining. Still, we're sitting at the bargaining table with both classified groups and our certificated group to engage in a collaborative dialogue about how we solve this problem. As noted earlier, this reduction plan represents about $30.8 million. I think our first interim demonstrates that even reducing to that amount does not put us at a balanced budget, which is extraordinarily painful when you think of the scope and the content of the recommended reductions in front of you this evening. The other piece is understanding that without a positive budget certification, negative or qualified, we run the risk of the county office coming in and starting to influence or direct some of our financial decisions. I would like to keep the prerogative of this board in place to make local decisions because I believe that we as a district know better what is best for our kids and our staff knows better what's best for our kids. And again, acknowledging I am not supposing or proposing that these reductions are good for our kids. But I don't want to give other entities outside of the district the opportunity to make our financial decisions. The reserve levels in our first interim and with a $24 million reduction, as I've said multiple times, are razor thin. That 3% reserve that we're required to have under the law represents about 4 to 6 weeks of payroll. It is not a reserve to sustain us through a storm. The other provisions that are important to note about the reserves are that if we dip into the reserves, we are obligated to put that money back by the next interim report, which likely means we need to go take out a loan. So I want us to be very mindful of those things as we go through this. And it doesn't make any of it easier. It doesn't make it more digestible and it doesn't make it better, but it is significant. The other piece I want to call out before wrapping up my remarks, and I appreciate everybody's patience, is one of the things that you don't see on the reduction list are revenue enhancements and revenue generation ideas. That is not to say that we won't be exploring those with great effort. However, I think it is a very precarious position for us to be in to assume increased revenue before it's actually realized in our budget projections. Let's say, for example, we presume that we will increase our ADA percentage by 1 or 2%. And let's say that represents, and I could be wrong with my estimations here, and Danny can correct me, but let's say that represents $2 to $3 million of revenue. If we overestimate that and it doesn't come to fruition, we are putting ourselves in an even more dire position by overestimating our revenue. So the absence of revenue generating ideas on the reduction list is not intended to say that we're not going to explore all of those options. We are going to explore all of those options with great effort and fidelity. But it's my recommendation that we see if those efforts produce increased revenue, and then work to reduce or undo some of the budget reduction decisions. Because 83 to 84% of our budget goes to people, we can't assume increased revenue, not take the appropriate action related to staffing, because after March 15th, we can't make another reduction in staffing until the next year, the next March 15th. So when I think about what we need to start doing differently, some of these are revenue generation ideas. We need to look at leveraging the use of our property to the best ability we can. I've had a lot of people asking me, well, what if we sell a property that the district owns? For example, what if we move the district office and we sell this property? When you sell a property, that revenue has to go into a restricted fund for facility enhancements only, Fund 40. So it does not really offset our general operating costs. While we have ample needs for facilities dollars, selling a property doesn't offset the operational side of our budget. There are options where, when done properly and with creativity and partnership, you can arrange a lease for district property, and leased revenue can go into your general fund. In a prior district where I served as superintendent, we partitioned off a part of our adult school property and signed over a 20-year lease with Wendy's. And we generated a lease payment every month from that arrangement. So there are arrangements that can be made, but I don't think we can assume those revenues coming into our budget before they actually hit our budget. And we'll be working to explore all those options for the district. I think we also need to go back and look at our program design and what we can do to help support students. I'm not suggesting that this happened tomorrow, but in a previous district where I was superintendent, we had half-day kindergarten. When I was in Fremont, implemented a full-day kindergarten or extended day kindergarten program. It's about a half an hour short of the full elementary day. And we saw a significant, how should I describe this? Our declining enrollment was nearly stemmed off in the first year that we did that. And I'm not presuming that that is exactly what will happen here, but I think we need to look at program design and program offering as a way to address some enrollment issues. I also think as we get through this really difficult portion of budget reductions, we need to look at redesigning how we operate. And it's a term that I've worked with Danny before on, which is zero-based budgeting. Kind of starting with zero and saying, what are we legally required to have? And then from there, what do we want to have? And if there's anything left after the want to haves, what would be nice to have? And then we can identify what it would be with ideal conditions if we can get revenue to that level. I also would suggest that we need to reset our staffing allocation model for classified support staff at our elementary and secondary schools. And that is not to say that our clerical classified support staff at our schools isn't excellent. But if you've been in any of our comprehensive high schools or middle schools, as an example, we have a base level of staffing that we provide under a staffing formula. And as schools increase in enrollment over the base staffing level, there's a menu of options that sites can choose from in terms of how they want to supplement the front office staff. And so while all of it, I believe, is done with positive intent, we have a situation where across, let's say, just our 4 comprehensive high schools, their front offices are staffed very differently with different positions. And I'm confident that the sites and the principals could defend all of those decisions. But I think if we renorm to what a comprehensive school needs for clerical classified support staff in the front office and scaffold that based on enrollment, we can have more stability in staffing and more understanding of what we need to do. Because another negative component of this very negative discussion is we can't expect to do everything that we're doing now with these reductions enacted next year. We are going to have to refocus and reprioritize what stays in our laser sharp focus of things that we want to accomplish and what may still stay on our radar of things we want to accomplish, but not get the same level of attention that it got the prior year. I think if we don't do that, we're not being genuine with ourselves and our community in terms of what we hope to accomplish. The other areas that I think we need to continue to look at is how do we continue to advocate for state and federal funding that meets our needs. I know SRVUSD is engaged in plans to reach out to state legislators, and I compliment them for that effort. I've recently sent communication to our state and federal officials, inviting them to the district to come see all the incredible things that are happening in our schools and how far we're making dollars stretch. And hopefully so they can see what it would really look like when enacting these budget reductions, so that they can see the rationale for changing some of the funding models that exist. And as I said earlier, I think looking at enhancing our revenue sources from things like facility rentals and increased partnerships. I do want to add a note of caution there. When I have done this in other districts, we look at, for example, increasing rental costs in hope of increasing revenue. We need to take a very balanced approach, and that's why I don't think we can assume an increase in revenue. We made some increases in rental costs for Fremont Unified, and a result of that is we lost 2 or 3 of our biggest rental clients to other facilities, and we actually saw a dip. So we need to be very mindful of how much the market, for lack of a better term, can absorb from increased fees. I've spoken a lot and I apologize, but I wanted to walk through the reduction plan. I do want to just close before we turn it to the board and to public comment, acknowledging that there's a lot of disagreement with this list. And a lot of people have contacted me to express their disappointment with the list. I am equally disappointed with the list. I do not like this list. This is, as I said earlier, this is not what I want to do. But we need to address our fiscal condition in order to ensure that we have a positive budget certification. There is no leadership manual, book, or seminar I've ever seen in the world that says 5 months into your first year as a superintendent in a new district, propose these things. But I think these proposals represent that the lower hanging fruit has already been grabbed in prior budget reductions. And I acknowledge that there may be a lot of criticism of the plan and suggestions that I reconsider my proposal. I've given the board, the community, and the staff my best effort in these reductions. I've had the honor and privilege to serve as a teacher, as a middle school assistant principal, as a director of special ed, student services, HR, and superintendent. And in my days as a principal, if my custodian was gone for half the day, I filled in. If my front office staff was gone, I filled in. If paraeducators were short, I filled in. If we were missing new food service providers, I filled in. Don't need a hairnet, but I filled in. And I offer those remarks because it is not lost on me how significant these reductions are and how painful they will be to people and to students. And so it is with a heavy heart that I make these recommendations. And with that, I'll turn it over to the board for discussion and or public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Kamick. Does anybody have any questions before I open it up to public comment?
I have questions, but I'd kind of like to hear the public comment first if
Okay.
everyone else agrees.
We have quite a few cards, but this is a very, very important issue and I want to hear from all of you. So I'm going to call up the person that's first and then the second person. So be ready when the first person is done. So the first person is Kelly Ryan and after her will be Rochelle Goldenberg. Shorts.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the board on this matter. I am a fellow community member. I am a teacher. I have both of my kids graduated from our school district, and it's part why I ended up here as a teacher as a second career. I'm an intervention teacher and a science teacher, and my focus and speaking tonight is we care about getting our students to school, to learn, to feel safe, and to get the support they need. I feel like attendance is an area that we need to focus on, and I feel like it has been a missed opportunity so far. I know that personally, just from my little corner of the world, I've gotten a lot of awesome support from our SRVUSD social worker who is a TSA in the district. But aside from that, I have not felt much of a focus from the district office on this. And I feel like it is a missed opportunity. And, you know, we may not be having the impacts that other school districts are having, but our attendance is definitely lower than it used to be. So I feel like that is an area that we'd like to see more I'd like to personally see more leadership for with, and then taking the best practices, looking at the schools that are doing the best with attendance and trying to translate that to other schools so that we can up our attendance. These are positive steps that we can take. And I'd like to see more positive focus on creating solutions. For example, even in the attendance, I feel like that the message has been, we can only have 7 SARB meetings a month at the district. I personally don't understand that. These are the kiddos that need us the most. I think that there needs to be either an explanation for this or, better work on it. The other areas with independent study contracts, this is another opportunity that I think that we need to make better use of. And that means taking the best practices, the schools that are doing the best with recouping the funds and really having leadership from the district administrators to focus in on streamlining the process so that we recoup the funds and let the teachers do the teaching and the grading, the communication with the kids, and like treat this as a paperwork thing that we need to do, check the box and get the funds in the door. I thank you for your time and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Positive solutions, I think, are the place to go. None of this sounds good to me either. Thank you.
Thank you. After Rochelle will be Cheryl Weicker, Jenny Georges.
Hi, my name is Rochelle Goldenberg. I'm a Wellness Center social worker for San Ramon Valley Unified. I'm also a former policy analyst and used to look at budgets and things like that all of the time. One of my concerns when I saw the budget proposal was the fact that over half of our social work team was slated to be eliminated, and also keeping the Wellness Center program, which I'm very proud of the program that we're operating, but operating that in a vacuum will be impossible. The work that our social workers do, especially across the district, are heavily in bringing in students and getting behinds sitting in seats. Without the social workers going out to do that heavy lifting and that work, our attendance would be lower. And we also are able to get students to go into the classroom and learn. One of the biggest challenges that I face is trying to get students to stay on campus, and being able to be without the student support counselors, without social workers, without appropriate counseling. We're not going to have the support for students to stay on campus. They will leave, especially in our high schools. They will leave campus, and we will miss that funding. The other piece that I just wanted to mention briefly is to please consider looking at some of the alternative funding sources for counseling services for students. There are funding sources that this district is not utilizing that other districts have begun using. And I would like for the district to start looking at things where we can leverage things like Medi-Cal funding and some of the new funding resources that have been made available for billing to be able to support all students in counseling, mental health, nursing, and so forth. I think we're missing one of the big pieces. I feel like this district has always valued our students. I feel like that there's always been a focus as a parent of a student who graduated from this district and a parent of a student who had special needs while he was a student in this district. It was a godsend being here. And I just want to continue that further and make sure all of our students have access, and for there to be an understanding of that we're not, that the work that we do is pretty integral into keeping students here. Thank you.
After Cheryl will be Dia Mundell.
Hi, yes. My name's Cheryl Weicker, Jenny Georges, and I am a wellness coordinator at Doherty Valley. And I am a social worker, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the reduction in social workers as well. In addition to everything that Rochelle said in regards to what we do at the Wellness Center and the mental health that we provide for the students, the social workers also work with the foster care. They work with the homeless population. They work with multitude of people that without the ability to have a social worker, they will be lost. And as a wellness coordinator, I can handle so much of what's going on with the mental health needs. While we have an affluent population that works with, that has access to mental health outside providers, a lot of the students don't feel comfortable, don't feel safe, don't feel that they're able to access it. They don't feel comfortable going to their family. They don't feel comfortable going to peers. They don't feel the ability to go outside and utilize the services that they might have through something like a Kaiser. And so they come to the counselors, they come to the social workers, they utilize the wellness center. If the reduction in social workers went from 9 to 5 to 4, I don't believe that the wellness coordinator would be able to handle all the resources and the needs of the students. What I'm suggesting is that we really evaluate what we're doing with the social workers, what we're doing with the foster care, what we're doing with the homeless population. Are we going to allow those students to be able to have their services met if we reduce the needs from 9 to 4? Thank you.
Thank you. After Dia is Michelle Dooner.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dia Mundell. I'm one of the social workers. I know a lot of you. I'm here today to talk about what everyone else is talking about, but take a little different angle. I've been with the district a long time. I was hired in 2012, and I was the only social worker for many years. One of the highlights of my career was in 2018 when, I don't remember her name, she was an assistant superintendent, came to my office in the B building here on campus and said, Dia, we see what you do. We're going to hire 2 more social workers. I almost fell out of my seat. I could not believe it. She goes, I need your help. We need to hire. So that year we hired 2, Michelle Dooner and Tassine Khan. That reduced my workload tremendously. Then we increased by 4 more when the Wellness Center came on, and now we're at a happy number of 9. I am so proud when I go out into the community and I tell people I work for a district that cares about mental health. I don't have time to tell you all the things that we do, and I hope you guys know. Many of you have worked with me out in the community and know what we do. I think what I wanted to do, I brought this. This was my graduate thesis in 1991. And I went out to prove that school social workers were so important in schools. And I did. That was in 1991. It's 2024. Our needs are so much more complicated than they were in 1991. So the thought of going backwards and reducing our staff from 9 to 4 is really hard for me to handle. I want to read a story, because I've got 1:23 left, from a student. Bear with me, this is a hard one for me. My name is Jacob. I was once a high school student, fortunate enough to be supported by a special social worker and one of the most incredible individuals, excuse me, I've ever met. So I want you to, when you hear this, you can take my name out and put any of the other 8 social workers in my place, because they do this. Growing up, I faced challenges most kids can't even imagine. I grew up in extreme poverty, often homelessness. My parents, who were drug abusers, were unable to provide stability. My childhood was marked by uncertainty, living in abandoned homes without electricity or running water, and often going door to door asking to clean yards so I could earn money for food. When I was just 12 years old, my mother told me I was old enough to take care of myself and ultimately abandoned me. From that moment, I was on my own, couch surfing and sleeping wherever I could. Despite all this, I was determined to succeed. I knew that education was my only way out, but with no parental guidance or support, I felt completely alone. That's when a certain social worker, Dia Mundell, changed everything. In 9th grade, my English teacher asked us to write a biography about our lives, and I wrote my truth. God bless English teachers. This is where we find lots of students. Sorry, I'll go fast. The next
I
day,
need you to
Mrs.
wrap up,
Mundell.
because we have a lot of cards.
I've got to finish this story. Mrs. Mundell called me into her office. I was terrified. I thought I'd done something wrong and feared CPS might take me away. But instead of judgment or punishment, she offered compassion, guidance, and practical help. She immediately saw the gaps in my life and worked to fill them. She handed me gift cards for toiletries and sports clothes, ensuring I had the basics I needed to continue playing football and running track. Her only condition was that I'd visit her office every day after class to talk. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't trust anyone, but Dia's patience and persistence broke through my walls. She didn't just help me survive, she helped
I
me
need you to
thrive.
wrap up, Dia.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. I
Thank
won't
you.
finish.
I appreciate it. After Michelle is Carl Nishi.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm a feeder pattern social worker. Cal High is my feeder pattern. When I saw the survey results, I was so excited that our SRVUSD community understood the importance of mental health as it was in the top 3 across the board. And so when the budget cut, when the plan came out and 24 of the 28 mental health professionals were cut, I was so surprised. I mean, I was just blindsided. Like, how could that be? Mental health is so important to our students. Their social, emotional well-being. Like, if they don't have that intact, they're not able to access their education. I can't tell you how many risk assessments we have done as social workers. Risk assessments are suicide risk assessments. So we have so many students every year that come in and tell us one thing that, okay, triggers something in us to get out the risk assessment. Low, medium, high. When it's high, we have to call in our SRO, who sometimes then has to 5150 the student, meaning the student has to go to the hospital. We are saving lives as social workers. If you reduce us by 55%, and you only have 4 social workers for the entire school district, I'm so worried about the lives of our students. And that's the main thing, but then there's other things too. For instance, we also work with our homeless population. I currently have a bike in the back of my truck that I will be delivering to a student who lives in a hotel because right now he walks 2 miles to and from school. He needs a bike. We're the ones who have the skills that go out and find people that will donate these sorts of things. We work with Adopt a Bike. Great, thank you. We can give bikes to our kids so that they can get to school. Without it, they don't have any way to get there. Without us, I'm worried that all of those connections that we make with our community members are going to go by the wayside. We just did a holiday gift program with our 250 SRVUSD students that we put together, the social workers put together with the community members. They're the ones who came up with the presents. Our kids just let them know what they wanted. Without us, that's not going to happen. We also did Thanksgiving for our families too. Without us, I worry about them. So I just wanted to give you a little glimpse of what the feeder pattern social workers do. I think that we're very important. I hope that this will kind of give you a little sense of the importance as well. Thank you.
Thank you. After Carl is Jennifer Jones.
Good evening. My name is Carl Nishi, and I'm another feeder pattern social worker. And excuse me if if I have a lisp because I'm wearing a dental retainer. But anyway, yeah, it's coming from I'm a relative newcomer to the district. I only started in February 2022. And coming from a long career in children and family services, I thought I had seen everything, but I was sadly mistaken. And I want to give you a glimpse of my first day on the job. My very first day on the job, I was called to SRV to provide crisis counseling. A student the night before had died of an overdose, and in the wellness center there were groups. Scattered amongst the wellness center were groups of kids, 6 to 12 strong. And the crisis team was there. I was there. Lacey Canton, the wellness center coordinator, was there. The school psychologists and the academic counselors were all supporting the kids. with exercises, we were meeting with them one-to-one. We were identifying other members of the friend group and reaching out to them to offer support. And needless to say, I went home thinking to myself, I'm so fortunate to work for the school district. This is such a strong school district. I'm part of a team that really provides meaningful services to these kids. And, you would think that a tragedy like this would happen once in a blue moon. But that's another thing that I learned. These tragedies and the trauma that unfolds from them happens on an ongoing basis. And the very next year, another student died under very similar circumstances. My third year on the job, we had a reprieve and there were no deaths at San Ramon Valley High. I can't speak of the other high schools, but all of the counselors, all of the support staff, we were giving each other high fives because, nobody had passed away that year. This year, there's another death by suicide, and that gives you a glimpse of what we do. But so much of our work is not seen because the nature of our jobs is highly confidential with very few exceptions. And for that reason, most of the community, even our own coworkers in the school district, really don't know what we do. If you do cut 24 of the 28 mental health and emotional support workers, there will not be a team to provide teamwork. Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
After Jennifer is Sasha Lubkin.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Jones, and I'm a TK teacher at Creekside. This is my 28th year of teaching, and I've had the pleasure of speaking before you all at different times during my career. Tonight, I wanted to come and discuss the superintendent's suggestion to increase class size. As a TK teacher, we're lucky enough that our class size is mandated by the state. From when I started teaching TK, it's 12-1. And for 25-26, it's 10-1. And with no mandates from the state for class sizes for K-5, and I'm only speaking because I'm an elementary teacher, the high school and middle school are a different story, but it's our responsibility as a community to do what's best for our students and keep class size at a teacher to student ratio that allows all children to thrive. And I guess what I really want to do is have everyone really imagine what an overcrowded classroom full of children really looks like. Not only is it impact children's physical space, but it also is very overstimulating, which to social workers can speak of as that's, I think, part of the reason we have children with a lot of mental health issues because they're being put in environments that are not healthy. And not only is their physical space and overstimulation part of the issue, it's making connections to their teachers, developing their social and emotional skills, and thriving academically. And my biggest reason, I guess, for coming here is I just want us to all remember that the numbers that are on these spreadsheets are actually not just numbers, they're our kids. And when making the final decisions about the cuts, even after hearing all the things that the social workers said, I feel like as a board and as a community and as a district, the cuts should be being made the furthest away from our students. And if you start up here and if this needs to be cut and that's the furthest away from our students, then fine. But we should not be cutting our students first. And I'll just end with our students deserve the best teachers and the best class sizes. Thank you.
After Sasha is Helen Burrows.
Hello. My name is Sasha Lupkin. Some of you may know me as the teacher on special assignment for attendance, and I chair the district school attendance review board. And I also support all of our schools to implement state laws and district policies and procedures around attendance. The reason I'm here tonight is because I would really like you to carefully consider some of the potential unintended consequences of reducing the district social worker team. They have expertise, and their role, as mentioned, may not be fully understood unless you've had a reason to interact with them, which most people don't, fortunately. However, one of the things that they do that's really relevant to my current position is that they are responsible for conducting home visits and following up with students and families when they are excessively absent. They serve to support school site teams to identify and overcome barriers to school attendance for students and their families. Without them doing this work, I do expect our attendance rates to drop. And given that we are in a funding crisis and our daily school attendance is a major factor in our district revenue, it seems short-sighted to eliminate staff who are actively working to improve our attendance. In addition to their Pupil Personnel Services credential, our social workers are also clinically licensed with the State Board of Behavioral Sciences to provide mental health services. They are highly trained and have a lot of expertise in mental health. And not only do they provide therapy, but they also provide case management and consultation with families and school site teams to make sure that students are receiving the help that they need both at school and outside of school. We have seen a huge increase in students who are experiencing mental health challenges since the pandemic. Unfortunately, while those one-time COVID dollars are going away, the mental health problems are not. And without the social workers, I fear that our district will return to a system where students may only be able to access long-term mental health care supports through special education. And that would further burden our already burdened special education department with evaluations and additional personnel that have to be assigned to support the student. Ultimately, I believe this would likely cost the district as much or more as keeping our social workers at their current staffing level, and would further cause delays in providing students with mental health interventions, which could also further impact their school attendance. They also serve a critical role in supporting our foster homeless and low-income families, which are unduplicated pupils are a priority for the state for us to support. Since they are funded largely through restricted funds, I would ask, if we are eliminating these positions, respectfully, how are we going to reallocate these funds to continue to serve the students that they are intended to be supporting? The reason that I care about this is I am actually not a teacher. I am a social worker. I have been a teacher on special assignment on an emergency teaching credential, which will be expiring this year. And I was expecting to return to the team next year. So
Need you to wrap up,
thank
please.
you. I hope that I still have a home here, but I also hope that all of them do too, because really the people who are most likely to lose out are our students and our district and our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. After Helen is Nicole Padawan.
Hi, Helen Burrows, Administrative Secretary and Student Services. I've been an employee here at the district for 20 years, and I have been in my current position in Student Services for 7 of those years. And why am I here? Because in the last 4 years, since the class and comp study came to be, and mine was classed incorrectly, I've applied to reclass my title every time that I was able, and I was denied every time. The reason for the denial was because I did not have significant new job duties or responsibilities. This has not changed. However, last fall, the district decided to initiate a change in my classification from Senior Department Secretary to Administrative Secretary, effective November 1st, 23. This did not change my job duties or my responsibilities. This was just a title adjustment that the district initiated. And because of this, my name is at the bottom of the seniority list, even though I've been there for 7 years doing that job. My position has a lot to do with ADA. I process all of the interdistrict transfers in and out of our district, which increase our ADA for our students coming from surrounding districts. This is a multi-layered job that involves communicating with family, districts, site staff, as well as my counterparts in surrounding school districts. This work is very time sensitive. After 7 years, I've built a relationship with coworkers and counterparts, which helped this process run smoothly. And last year, we had over 400 interdistrict transfers come to SRV. I also run the home hospital program. This is a program that assists our students when they are unable to attend because of physical, medical, or emotional disabilities. And this also impacts our funding because we are reimbursed by the state for the hours that the home teachers work with the students. And I just feel like there's something very unfair in what has happened. And I'm hoping that everybody can kind of see that and understand. So I'm asking if you could reconsider the proposed reduction of the administrative secretary in Ed Services, and take into consideration my years in the position and not the date of the district initiated title change.
Thank you. After Nicole will be Rebecca White.
Good evening. My name is Nicole Padawan, and I have been working for SRV since 1996. That's 28 years and over half of my life. I've been a 6th grade math teacher, a 7th grade core teacher, and I've served as a TSA for literacy, a TSA for Common Core, and a TSA for San Ramon Valley Teacher Induction Project, which we call SRVTIP. Over these years, SRVTIP has benefited from immense support from our classroom mentors and teachers, our leadership team over at Ed Services, and support from you, our board. And for that, I thank you. Every program on the reduction list makes a profound impact. I myself am qualified to speak about the student impact of our induction program, SRVTIP. And so tonight I'll do just that. I've seen many changes during my tenure, including staffing reductions to the SRVTIP team. What once was a team of 7 has been reduced to 3 and now stands at just 2, my colleague Nok Win and myself. There are a few things I'd like to share about SRVTIP. For one, the induction process, which SRVTIP oversees, is mandated by the state of California. Some of our teachers come to us before having begun a credentialing program. So with no preparation whatsoever. Some of our teachers come to us to work in fields, for example, STEM or special education, which traditionally have a very low rate of retention. Our program uses a mixed model of 2 full-time release TSAs to support all of our new teachers, classroom mentors, site administrators, provide professional development, and manage all aspects of our program. Our LCAP goal specifically provides for philosophical and fiduciary support of SRVTIP and states that LCAP will continue to focus on recruiting, hiring, and retaining the best and most qualified staff, and on providing them with high-quality professional development. In the past several years, SRVTIP has come in at approximately $115,000 under our allocated budget every single year. We have consistently shown that we can do more with less. But with an additional proposed $191,000 of projected cuts to our team, less would be our breaking point. That said, we want you to know that we commit to continue to reduce costs without reducing impact, and we have submitted some ideas to our leadership team in Ed Services. When we developed the LCAP, we relied on research showing a clear connection between teacher quality and student achievement. Notably, that the California Department of Education emphasizes that an effective educator is the most significant factor influencing student achievement, the most significant one. Teachers have a far greater impact on student achievement than any other single schooling factor. By maintaining 2.0 staffing in SRVTIP, you're not funding an extra person. You're sustaining a program that prioritizes educator effectiveness. I invite you to consider the enormous student impact SRVTIP support of our teachers and mentors has on student social emotional well-being and student learning. I invite you to continue to fund our program at 2.0 staffing. You may wonder if effective educators are
I need you
born
to
or
wrap
if
up,
they're
please.
made. Very few are born. Most are made, and that's where SRVTIP comes in.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention.
After Rebecca will be Dr. Jim Smithwick.
Good evening. My name is Rebecca White and I am another social worker. I am currently the Wellness Center Coordinator at Monte Vista High School. The proposed cuts to the social worker team sadden and frighten me because I know that the work we all do keeps our students safe. I want to read an excerpt from a letter that a student wrote to me last week after they were released from a hospitalization for suicidal ideation. So quote, "So then I started thinking about safety and just that general idea. I remember the first time we met, you kept telling me that what was said in your office was confidential and that it was a safe space and that it was safe to say whatever was on my mind, and I thought you were crazy. However, what I realized while I was thinking is that the space really isn't safe. What I mean by that is, it isn't the chair that makes your office safe. It isn't the pride flag and it isn't the weighted teddy bear. You make your office safe. So I guess having you at the ER made the ER a safe space too, because that safety isn't confined by the four walls that make up your office. I was only able to be there for the student and their family because of the mental health staff that we have now. We have social workers, support counselors, and full counseling teams that work together supporting students and their families. If you cut 55% of our district social work team, the support will not exist. The remaining social workers would be inundated with so much work and so much need that they would not be able to be effective for our students and their families, and several critical resources, programs, and support structures would cease to exist because no one would be there to create, maintain and provide them for our community members. The safety, as my student identified, is not the wellness centers or any of our offices. It's us, and should the cuts happen, that safety and that life-saving support would be gone. So I urge you to reconsider, and just wanted to share that as a way to share what we do and the importance of our role in the district.
Thank you. After Dr. Smithwick is Michael Stiglet.
My name is James Smithwick, and I'm the victim of the many ad hominem attacks by the director of IT, and this is a result of what happens. But a year ago, it was decided to move the AV team from IT to maintenance. The immediate result of this change provided the AV group with a 30% bump in effectiveness and productivity by cutting out the number of hours we spent on redundant and excessive IT meetings. When AV moved over to maintenance, the then district business manager allowed for the funding of the AV department to stay with IT. During this time, the IT director has removed many of the aspects of our job that were specified on our job descriptions. The IT director gave these AV tasks to computer techs and the IT coordinator. Neither of these groups have AV functionality in their job description. The end result of giving AV specialization work to these employees who do not have the experience or qualifications for doing these jobs has resulted in a more expensive and more dangerous school system. Much AV work has unilaterally transferred by the IT director to bolster the jobs of highly paid IT managers. The AV has seen dangerous IT managed installations. When AV realized these dangers, we gave pictures of them and supporting DSA standards to the management. The management seemed to ignore these threats to our children's safety and claimed it was too late to bring the contractor back to fix their faulty installations. The AV team would have recognized these poor installations and corrected them on the spot, because part of our job description is to understand the code for doing these installations. The fact that 3 AV positions were recommended as expendable was to create a false metric, making it look like IT was streamlining its staff. This is not the case and should not be allowed, because AV does not work for IT, it works for maintenance, whereas this cut affects the maintenance division, not the IT division. The reason given to me for eliminating of these positions was attributed to the IT director. This rationalization relied upon false statements claiming that the AV job classifications overlapped IT techs, electricians, low voltage techs, network techs, and programmers. Although it's true that all these are aspects of our job, they do not overlap our classification. Also, spending thousands of extra dollars per installation in gyms, NPRs, classrooms, stadiums, and other district facilities has been the result of AV management of or IT management of AV installations. We need to bring honesty to light and remove the AV technician position from the cut list and restore the physical and fiscal management of the AV group fully to the maintenance system. Low voltage is less than 5% of my job. So the people, so whenever you keep turning around saying that, we're going to turn around and push it over to
I need you to
low
wrap up.
voltage.
Your time is
I'm
up.
wrapping it up. Thank you very much. When you turn around and keep pushing that myth, it's a false metric created by someone.
Thank you. Our last card is, I can't tell whether it's Elisa Grosh or Alonzo Grosh. Sorry, I could. Okay, okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I am tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Michael Steglick. I'm an AV tech for San Ramon Valley Unified School District. I started in the district in 2019. The AV team is here to serve the students and the staff of the school district, and we have over 50 years of combined experience in the field. By consulting with the AV team, the district will learn to save our schools money, resources, while creating a longevity plan to realize future savings. This plan will allow a better distribution of funds and enhance a better equitable learning experience for our students. If because of lack of AV group, the district is forced to go outside to third-party vendors to do our job, it'll be a tremendous cost to the school district and a safety to our students and staff. I have a few examples. In the past year, the Wardy High marquee was down for over a year. IT was called out to the sign company twice for that sign company to fix it at $5,000 per visit. After an unsuccessful attempt, the site was told that the sign would cost $60,000 in expense to replace. Abdul Nixon asked the AV team to rectify the situation. We did. We had the sign up and working in 3 hours. 3 hours to save $60,000. At Montevideo, we saw the marquee was broken. The site reported that IT told them the sign company was out of business and the sign controller program would not work on the district assigned computer, and the sign was broken. It took AV less than an hour to repair the computer installation, repair the marquee, and contact the solvent company, and savings cost of about $25,000 that they want to charge them. We also installed new marquees in Live Oak for around $8,000 savings, and in Iron Horse and Country Club and other sites. Every time AV installs an AV in a classroom, we save approximately $800 per classroom in comparison to the quote that was given by IT to Monterre for 12 upgrades. We easily save over $10,000+ when we design and install systems in theaters, gyms, NPR, and press boxes. There's a very important aspect that is more important even than the money that we save, and that's the safety of our students and staff. On one example, this is just one example, I was at Gale Ranch, and the installation that we resolved could have killed kids. It was a 40-pound security camera that was not secured by safety standards, so by safety cables. If there was an earthquake, that could have fallen and killed a kid. There's another gym where a third-party installer did it. It was a projector, weighed about 35 pounds, fell off the wall because the contractors that we contract out to, because they don't want to let AV do the job, did not hit the studs, and it was only in the sheetrock. And that was right over the lunchroom. I can go on with more stories, and I respectfully ask that the board meet with the AV team before our jobs are eliminated, so we can show you how we can save our school district money, have a huge ROI, and realize future savings and safety. Please take it upon this challenge to meet with us and discuss our jobs.
Thank you. On the card before that, Elisa, would you like me to read your comments? Parent, staff, student, admin, and community surveys all reflect their top 3 priorities: mental health, this is a school LCAP goal, student support services. How can we I can't read your writing here, but equitably and inclusive environment for our students to thrive if we don't have mental health services. Support this end. This is short-sighted and students' well-being shouldn't be sacrificed when other options are available. Thank you. Okay, that concludes all of our cards. So now I'm going to open it up to the board for discussion. I'll let you start off. Questions or comments?
Or do you have a process? You know, sometimes I think it helps when we like take turns with questions rather than one person doing their whole list, that kind of thing is.
Yeah.
Is that a fair way to go?
That sounds like a great way to go.
I'll defer to Travis first if he has any. Since he's on the end that usually starts.
No questions, at least on this. I think Superintendent Kamick, you did a great job of addressing some questions I had regarding SAT testing. I think that the only thing I'd note is that if there's going to be any effects to PSATs, SATs, or ACTs, just making sure that students can still take their SATs on campus and during school days. That's something that students at Monte Vista and other high schools really rely on, because if you're not able to take the test at your school, typically you have to drive, 5+ hours. And for a lot of students, that's just not accessible. So making sure that we still have that as an option, which is something I think you pretty much addressed.
Yeah, and if I may, I did not clarify this earlier. I think many people understand it. But it not only applies to the SAT portion of your comments, Travis, but all of these reductions are written and proposed to be effective at the end of this school year, June 30th, for the next school year. So just for clarity's sake, what is here today would stay through the end of the year, including any arrangements for testing, but certainly your feedback is acknowledged and appreciated.
I just wanted to thank everybody who came to take the time tonight to give us this information. It's really important to me as a board member to hear from our whole community, our staff, our students, parents. And I know it makes for a long evening, but it's very, very valuable to me, and I'm sure to the rest of the board, to hear from all of you, because this is a really, really hard situation that we're in. And we're trying to do our best to prioritize our students. And it's just very difficult to be able to make those decisions. So I want to thank you for being here with us.
So I made notes by list, but I think since most of our community feedback came from folks in the SRVUSD unit or association, I wanted to start with one of the questions I had there, and maybe we can kind of all stay on one topic and then go to others. So since we heard from many of the social workers, I wanted to start with my one on social workers. I recall that when LCAP came into effect and we had our very first one, the addition of one social worker was a big deal. It was like kind of the first act towards applying our supplemental funds. And I remember it was Tony Taylor, for the person who could remember, the assistant superintendent, who brought it up. And it was all like, wow, social worker, hadn't even, thought of that position being relevant in a school district. And just like one of the speakers said, that was pretty avant-garde, and it still is. I've been at meetings talking to other school board members, and they'll be like, wow, San Ramon has social workers. Wow, you have 9, it's significant. And so given the nature of what supplemental funds are for, I think that is a position that is really important for us to protect in some capacity. And I'll recognize that the proposal is to cut it, reduce it, not to eliminate it. But I am really struggling with the concept of that the area-wide ones, the first one was district-wide, and then it, worked into carving up the district. Would the 5 that are being pulled back versus the wellness center ones, and granted, we all love the wellness centers and see their importance, but it just kind of feels, I'm just concerned about, can the 4 at the wellness centers do the job of protecting our most vulnerable kids, which are the foster youth and the all the kids with mental health needs, but specifically those foster youth who generate those supplemental funds. And so I really appreciate that whole social worker team came out, because you're right, we don't hear about your jobs because of the confidential nature of it. And it was very helpful to hear about it. I've seen little pieces, but to have you all here was really, really meaningful. And I'm just going to say that's an area that I really worry about the impact of, because of the high stakes nature of it.
Can I pop in a question off of that? In regards to the LCAP and to our social workers, based on the fact that we just approved a new LCAP plan for the next 3 years, how would these cuts to our counseling and social workers affect that plan that we have approved and that we have sent up to the state and that we are now held accountable to?
Christine may be able to offer some additional information on this as our Assistant Superintendent of Ed Services, but in general, we have our LCAP, a 3-year plan, but we bring forward annual reports and revisions, and it would be handled through that process. And if I may, while someone is preparing for their next question, Trustee, heard your comments reminded me that I didn't cover one aspect of this in my opening remarks, and I apologize for that. I think I covered the fact that the reduction list itself is $30.8 million, and there's, I think, ample fiscal evidence for why we could consider the list in total. But the minimum requirement is 24 million. And I shared with our Budget Advisory Committee that I plan to bring a list close to $30 million because I did not want to present the board a list of strictly $24 million and have the board as elected officials be in a position where there wasn't room to respond and maneuver related to the list. And so if it wasn't expressed earlier, the total reduction is 30.8, the minimum is 24. And so there is about $6.8 million there of maneuverability, for lack of a better term. And so if I didn't make that clear to the audience or those watching, I just wanted to clarify that. I know the board is keenly aware of that.
So I know most of what I said was comments, but I should turn it into what is the question. I would welcome feedback from the team that created the list. And I know you were all very thoughtful about how you did it. Is there some middle ground between 4, 5, and 9? Could we reduce, but maybe not reduce so much? All of this is about how do we spread the need and the work and the demands among fewer people. It's not like the work goes away. Some of the focus might go away, as Superintendent Kamick said, but it's like, how do the people that remain take care of the needs? And so if you're able to, or can come back to it, what could it be a more palatable thing if it were keeping 7 or keeping 6 or something like that?
I had a question on not only social workers, I've got that, but the student support counselors. How are they different? Because they're also not the, the elementary school counselors or the high school counselors.
Thank you for the question. So each of our middle schools have a 0.5 and each of our high schools have a 1.0, and they support a tremendous amount of our mental health needs amongst our students, kind of separate and apart from the wellness room and then the academic counselors and what they provide. So they're additional mental health support to our middle and high school students.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I just noticed that there are, along with the social worker cuts, there's also reduction with the student support counselors. And then I know that even a program we heard, I think, on an email, eliminate Speak Up and Be Safe program. So it seems like there are several line items that we may be reducing or eliminating specifically on student wellness. So to ask about that. Thank you.
So I've been in this district a long time because I have a big gap in my kids, 11 and a half years. And I've seen the district change and the student population change. And I'm very, very concerned about the well-being of our kids and prioritizing that. That's been something that made me run for office the first time, because back in 2017-18, when we weren't really talking that much about social and emotional learning and well-being and mental health in schools, I was seeing it at the high schools. I was seeing the results of the academic stress and the social pressures and all of those things that were ramping up. And the district did start to pay attention to that. And I'm really concerned now that we're pulling out too much of our resources from that area because the need now from back then is probably 20-fold. So for me, I would want to carefully consider what we do in this area, because pulling out so much of the support for our kids in that arena is really scary.
And to piggyback on that question a little bit, on this line line item, CJ, it says reduce 8.2 in student support, 8.2 FTEs. What remains? That's one thing that we don't have on that line item.
So Assistant Superintendent Gerardo can cover this a little bit better, but the student support counselors are a position above and beyond our staffing allocation for counselors. So the elimination of these would mean that our traditional school counselors would be the counseling staff.
I see. Okay.
So that looks like at Iron Horse, that looks like the 2 counselors, not the 2 counselors plus a half FTE that helps with more of the support counseling rather than the academic scheduling, making sure that yeah, okay. So it's that additional support. Yeah. So there's a couple of questions that I have, but you know, I know that a large percentage of these cuts have to come to the negotiating table before you know, we can take any action. Do we need to think about what levers we need to put in place so that we can be a little more nimble around the fact that we have to work around negotiating? And so kind of having like a tiered list of cuts that we have more control over, more autonomy with, more agency with, in terms of that. And then another thought that I have too around this is that, you know, we're in a world where we struggle with recruitment and retention, as Superintendent Kamak had mentioned. And so thinking about putting on that lens of people cuts versus thing cuts, right? And thinking about if we're going to tier those cuts, when we let a person go, how much harder is it going to be for us to get that person back if we're able to bring in more revenue or the ADA shifts or those types of things, whereas bringing a program back and that type of thing.
I think the whole list is people,
Pretty
except
much.
for
No,
some
I
of
know,
the things on the
but-
first page, right?
And that's one of the things, Shelley, you
But
can
the class size and, you know.
Well, class
although that
size is
does
people
affect-
too.
Yeah,
Everything's
furlough
people.
days, that's not grasping it. It's
Those
all-
affect people, but they're
right,
not
right,
people.
Yeah, when we went through this at the Budget Advisory Committee, that was really where the entire team really wanted to go to first. And it was line items and what software are you using for the email? What software are you using for this? And the numbers just didn't add up. And we went through effectively all of them in all categories with the entire team. And that's one of the things that's really difficult is as I'm looking at this list, 24 is what we have, you put a resolution out last meeting that we will absolutely cut that. And that gets us to a structural deficit and razor thin margins. I think, Danny, you were saying $187,000 of wiggle room and a, $470 million budget. That's really difficult. And yet I don't want to cut so far and then learn that the situation changed down the road. Like we really should, you were saying if we cut all 30.8 million, we're still in a structural deficit. So that lets me know that 24 million seems really low. But I do agree with this tiered approach idea. I just wonder as a team, like, how do we implement that where we're not in a bad situation where we're scrambling? I felt like we were scrambling to cut 3.5 this year because of a budgetary error and mistake that was made. And I don't like the scramble because it feels like you just have no time to think about it.
Well, there's also the timing aspect that March 15th notices create. So I think you kind of have to go after the whole thing aggressively. You have to do the March 15th notices. And then if some other things work out, if we get more money than is already planned, if the revenue enhancement options come to fruition quickly, you can back off on those notices by it's May 15th, right? Is the date for the later ones. Or you have to keep going and you try to reinstate some the following year. But this whole plan of the minimum number of 24 is a big, huge, hairy, big number. And it puts us into touching important things, no matter how we look at it.
How much will we save through attrition, like people retiring or taking leaves or leaving the district for whatever reason? Like how does that factor into all of these cuts?
So Mr. Hillman may be able to give us a more quantifiable number. I don't know that we have that exact number, but I think Danny can clarify, but from my perspective, I think there's two considerations. With declining enrollment, even though next year, the current legislative analyst office projections are for roughly a 2.4 COLA. Even with a 2.4 COLA, with declining enrollment, we start next year with less money than we have this year. In terms of how much money we save in attrition, when we staff our school sites, which is the bulk of our staffing, we adjust that based on the enrollment of each school site. And there's a corresponding loss of revenue for the lost ADA and then a staffing adjustment. I don't know that there's necessarily a net savings because of the declining enrollment piece.
That's correct. And at this point, it's difficult to predict exactly. So what we were able to do in the MYP, the 3-year that you saw at First Interim last week, already into those numbers is the decline in enrollment, which we've already talked about as one of the assumptions. The other assumption is that drives a lower expenditure specifically on our classroom staff. If you have fewer students, you don't need as many teachers. So there's already baked into that what you saw on the screen, 20 FTE less. That's just based on the attendance. Now, we will fine tune that when we go to do staffing. We typically do that in the spring along with HR, and we give the school site staffs, the principals, all their numbers so that they can go hire vacancies and such. And we'll have people leave and we'll have people retire. All of that still happens, but the core number of positions that we need to fill will always be driven by the number of students we expect to have on day one. And that fluctuates, and we adjust it a couple of times from spring into summer. But some of those savings numbers, like the 20 FTE, those are already in the numbers that you saw. So there's not going to be a lot of additional savings coming from the decline in enrollment.
Another concern I had sort of along the lines of related to mental health for our students is the combining of student services with equity. And having seen the work that our equity director has done, Hong has done an incredible job, and the need that we have in our schools because of some of the hate crime or the hate language and some of the incidents that happen. We've been able to really bring in some programs and things that have made a difference to our students. And I'm concerned about that. Those two jobs being put together is really going to be like a lot for one person. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think it's something that I'm looking at, thinking whether that is someplace where we want to, if it's possible, to try to preserve some of that, because that work informs our school culture to such a huge degree. And that's really important so that our students perform well. And I've just seen how valuable it's been with some of the things that I've sat in on with the NAACP and SLAM and lots of programs that are bringing our community together, our students together. I know there's not a great answer to that right now, but that's one of the other areas that I have questions about.
And what I'd like to see on the equity piece is, I do think it's super important, but I also wonder if everybody should be concerned about equity in each one of their specific roles and tasks. And kind of in this concept of, zero-based budgeting is when we come back and go, how do we build this thing back up with funding that we realize that we're going to have for the next several years, is how do we align that goal of equity in with those positions. And the thing that is also attention for that is all the great programs that come from that, but then also keeping the dollars close to the classroom. And I feel like there is somewhat of a mandate, and I feel like it's reflected in here that the biggest cuts should come from management, and preferably as far away from the classroom as possible. And I know that's, it's hard to say that because every number on this page, and somebody said it at public comment, it's attached to a person serving a student. And even though it's in management, they're serving students and they're serving the people that are serving the students. So there's no easy answer to it. One of the things I do come back to that is interesting when I look at is our staffing FTE versus enrollment, and kind of looking at each one of these categories. And we are rolling back management to lower than the 2019-2020 number. And I think where we're at now compared to 2019 is probably serving our students better. So my hope would actually be to, how do we protect those teachers in the classroom the most if we're making cuts? The nice cuts are, like getting rid of Be a Mentor and shifting it over to Arbiter. That does actually feel like maybe that's the one low hanging fruit that we put on there, but it's only $250,000.
I did have a question about that one, if we can
Yeah.
ask it while we're on it.
Perfect segue.
When we first went to Be a Mentor, it was a monumental lift to make that happen. And then at some point, there was a change. I think maybe it was because we paused things during COVID. I don't remember what the interrupter was, but we had to reload everything again. And we actually had to hire staff to help because Be a Mentor staff couldn't keep up with the incredible number of volunteers we have in our community, which is a good problem to have. But I would think there's a cost of transition, not saying we shouldn't do it, but I think we need to be eyes wide open about the cost of that transition too.
Yeah, and I think it brings up another point, Trustee Hurd, not just in connection to Be a Mentor, an arbiter, and a transition. But I think when we look at $30.8 million in reductions in 24 being the minimum, these are the best projections that we have. And we've heard in this room from different people, and I've acknowledged that it's absolutely true. Our budget work is a projection based on the best information that we have at the time. For first interim, for example, we have actual data from July 1st to October 31st. And we build the report based on that. And I think we just have to acknowledge when we look at the reduction list and when we get to the next board meeting in January, there is, I think, some rationale to produce a list somewhere above 24 million. Because through negotiated effects, through transition, through change, if we leave ourselves no margin for some of the savings being delayed, some of the savings being reduced, with our razor thin margins, we could be in trouble. If we had 5% reserves, 6% reserves, we might be able to absorb more of that. But our reserves, while in the millions, are all restricted. And I think Danny pointed out maybe $187,000 of general reserve dollars. We should probably look at a reduction list that is, if the board wants to hit 24 as a minimum, we should still look at something a little bit above that to allow for an offset of actual savings. We have done our best to go into the system and look at what are the total costs for individuals in these positions. but it's not always a perfect science. The classified ranks is a wonderful example it's a terrible situation, but it's a wonderful example of the complication because if an individual's position is reduced and classified and they held a position in another classification, they will bump back to that position, bumping somebody else, which may likely bump somebody else. And it's 4 or 5 people back is the person that may actually lose the job. And so this is our best math in the moment. But I just want to add that caveat that we need to plan for some buffer room for all of those things.
So with the bumping, you risk overestimating the savings because of the person who actually ends up.
It could be
having to leave.
overestimated. On occasion, it might come out in your favor, but some of these reductions might come in a little bit higher when fully realized. Some might be a little bit lower. But I just want to call it out because our reserves are at such a thin mark. We can't, wouldn't be doing my job as your superintendent if we approved a list just at 24 million and let's say the actual savings is 23.2 million because we don't have enough to cover that in reserves.
Can you give us an idea of, advise us on what level above 24 we really need to be shooting for in order to be safe and not risk negative certification?
Yes, I can. But I'm going to ask that the board give staff a little bit more time because I don't want to give you that number in this meeting and put that number out for our community because it's such an important number. It's not that I want to keep it secret. I want to make sure we get it right.
Yeah.
And I'm not keeping it secret because we have it and I don't want to say it. But I'd like to work with Danny and try and figure out what an adequate margin would be plus or minus to really keep us safe at 24.
Is there an operational way to have that be that buffer, if you will, to be a tier 2 so that we're not cutting it before we need to cut it, before we know we need to cut it?
Conceptually, yes. In other districts where we've had to make significant budget reductions, and I've heard some conversation amongst the board tonight for a tiered model. And when we get to the end of the conversation, I'll ask for some direction from the board. Staff can certainly bring forward a tiered model. In some cases, that tiered model can operate, I think, the way you're describing, Trustee Bratt, where we make these reductions and then if something falls short, we go down to the second tier. The only caveat I would offer in this circumstance is because so many of these proposed reductions are people, we'd have to be very mindful of the March 15th notices. And as Trustee Hurd pointed out, the notice has to go out by March 15th, and then you have a provision under the Ed Code by May 15th to make sure you're going to enact that reduction or pull that layoff notice back. But if that's the direction of the board at the end of the conversation, staff can go back and work on some tiered options and work on, kind of drawing that line where we think it needs to be drawn in the list to get to 24 million with, as I've acknowledged, some buffer to make sure we don't come up $800,000.
I view it kind of like how we do our bond lists, but sort of like upside down of that, right? Where you gotta plan for doing all of it, but the idea of how you restore it rather than if you have money left over, you do the project, but it's the same kind of concept. But I think the action in January probably needs to be put it all on there for doing the analysis of bumping and all of that. And then you have until May to figure out where it falls. Another item on the SRVUSD list that I wondered if we could explore impact on is the elementary counselors at 11 positions. And my understanding is right now, 1 counselor serves 2 schools. In an attempt to just explore what ifs of rather than eliminating the whole thing, if you just cut it in half. And I'm curious if 1 counselor served 4 schools and then maybe the 5th day of the week was spent for catching up, report writing, connecting, basically working the MTSS process. Would that dilute what they do too much, or is that a middle ground worth entertaining?
As a former elementary principal who used all of my Title I dollars at a very high need school to pay for a 4-day-a-week school counselor. I would say it does dilute their work a little bit too much, but at the same time, any counseling support is better than no counseling support. So I think it's really about readjusting the scope of students that we're expecting to serve or that our counselors are expecting to serve. And I don't know the percentages, so to the counselors in the room, please forgive me if I'm off. But if we're talking about an elementary counselor split between two sites, maybe they're focused on the top 15 intensive students, the top 15% of intensive students on a campus. And they might address some of that through one-on-one work and some of that through group counseling sessions. If we modify the structure to try and retain some of those FTE, it might mean that instead of the top 15%, and again, this is just for conversation's sake, please forgive me if I'm wrong on the percentages, it might mean only the top 5% of intense needs, or the top 2%. But I would say any level of counseling is better than none. In ideal conditions, we'd be able to retain all of these positions.
And I'm just wondering about the scale, like, so if you're cutting it in half, would the 15% become 7.5? Or, obviously you lose focus when you have to spread it among 4 schools. It's probably already hard enough to spread it too.
Yeah, the other, why we're on the topic of elementary counselors, and as is the case with the entire list that I've presented, it's not, despite perceptions, it's not how I see the value of these individuals and the work that they do. But I think we have to keep in mind for the elementary counselor positions, those are currently paid with one-time funds. We have allocated one-time funds. Maybe the business team can help me if I'm wrong here. We've allocated one-time funds in our June budget of last year for these to go one more year. And there was still a relative balance in that funding where it was maybe possible to stretch it another year. So if we were to, let's say, make this budget reduction go down in half or a percentage from where it's proposed, I think we need to acknowledge that that may buy us a little bit more time until those funds expire. And then we either need to acknowledge that they will then go away or find another way to move them into general fund dollars or some other funding structure for the district.
And just to be clear, so this line item is putting that $3 million back into restricted funds to be used for something else. It's not saying that it's a $3 million reduction for 11 elementary counselors.
I think it may be best described, and Danny, correct me if I'm wrong in this description, please, but I think it might be best described as when we need to sweep money from a block grant, what we're buying ourselves is more time to address the structural deficit. So we've designated reserves, I think, in prior years to help deal with declining enrollment. You could think of it along those lines. We're taking this one-time dollar out of the budget expenditure side sooner than we ever anticipated to help buy us more time. And in many ways, that's one of the fundamental challenges and why when we get through this difficult process, we need to redesign how we're doing things because of the reduction list. 13.4 of it is one time. So there's a lot to restructure once we get through this difficult period.
Which I think the point you just said is why the idea of let's just focus on revenue enhancements just can't be the case. We have to go through this pain and then relook at how we build everything back. I mean, we've talked about the desire to do a zero-based budget forever. I've never been through that process and I've been on the board for 18 years. It seems like when you are a district that is constantly dealing with this financial edge, you really need to do that at some point. You can't just always be adding and subtracting from the status quo.
So is 3 million really ongoing if those funds expire? I mean, it's kind of a weird hybrid between ongoing and one time.
Yes, in short, that it is a weird hybrid. So we have until, this is a learning recovery block grant. It expires at the end of the 2026 school year. I'm looking over at Evan to to confirm for me. It's either that or 2027, but it's coming up. We have to spend the money by then. So it's not like if we hold on to it, we can eke it out and do a little bit for the next 10 years. That the money has to be spent or it has to be sent back. I think the reality is that we are sitting in a situation right now where the list of items is less than ideal, as the superintendent has mentioned, and we need to right size. And so there are other things we can use that money for. There's other things that if we want to continue the service, as you mentioned, Trustee Hurd, we have to then find a different funding source for it because we will want to try to maintain that for more than 18 months or 2 years. So there's a little bit of what funding source do we use to pay for the ongoing expense? And then there's also the puzzle we're trying to solve, which is which expenses can we stop doing so that they're not ongoing? And that's not to say that it sounds maybe like I'm playing people's jobs or something like that. That's not what this is. But we do have to figure out some sort of solution to this. And so it means that we have to stop spending on certain things that we like because we're in the situation that we're in. And we have certain funding sources that we can use, but not forever. And we have other funding sources that are more permanent that we could talk about transitioning an item like this to, but that means something else is going to have to not happen. It's so tight that we have to start making decisions and choices as opposed to just saying, well, let's just charge it to that account and we'll figure it out down the road. We've kicked it as far as we can kick it, and we've got to start making some actual decisions that are different about how we want to do things. And so there's, as you mentioned, Superintendent Kamick, there are some decisions to be made in the short term, and then there's more medium and long-term decisions, which are probably more like building a new puzzle from scratch. That's could be a very meaningful process, and I think it could be useful for us given how much smaller we are as a district compared to how we used to be. We haven't really fully right-sized ourselves because frankly, the pandemic got in the way, So there's some other reasons for that, but it is an explanation as to why we are where we are.
Yeah.
So we can definitely do lots of things. We just can't do everything. And so we're hitting a point where we're going to have to start making that choice.
I have a couple questions that were asked of me by community members that I wanted to be able to put out tonight so that I can get some clarification around them. One of them that was brought up to me was that our high schools have 3 APs in each one of our schools, regardless of how many students they have. And they're asking why we're not looking at cutting into those positions versus maybe some of the teachers' positions or things like that. And so I just wanted to get clarification on that so that our community would understand why we're doing what we're doing and why the decisions are made like that, because that isn't on this list.
Yeah, I can help answer that and perhaps the HR team and Ed Services team can respond to the number at each side. I think our biggest schools, Doherty and Cal High, have APs beyond 3. And so, thank you. So the way we staff our AP positions is dependent on enrollment. So as our enrollment continues to decline, depending on where the declines happen, we'll continue to follow our staffing formula and reduce APs accordingly. I also think that having been a secondary AP and a secondary administrator, it is hard to quantify the scope of work that's taking place for our secondary assistant principals and administrators. That is not to say that the other work described in this room tonight isn't as equally as important. But there are some provisions that have to be in place in terms of the number of IEPs that we need to hold. All of them need to have a designee or an administrator, and best practice would be to have an administrator in all of those meetings. In addition, administrators, much like a lot of staff members at a school site, their title isn't counselor, but they end up doing a lot of counseling. They do a lot of supervision. Their work is, I think, equally important to the overall operations of a comprehensive school, especially at our comprehensive high schools. So that is where we looked at trying to keep the management positions in place at the school sites that we think are most responsible for supporting teachers and classified staff and students, And that's why we took a look at reducing administrative positions out of the district office at a larger scale and not reducing them at the school sites. One of the things that we heard in the Budget Advisory Committee was, while there tends to generally be universal agreement for reductions in management, we heard from members of that committee about how important the assistant principals were to the overall functioning of the school, especially related to student behaviors and intervention in special education.
Thank you.
And Shelley, in addition to that, we made cuts in assistant principals, and I want to say it was 18 or 19. It was during that whole time when we were, really in the thick of doing reductions, because we had started to flatten. I think maybe we were preparing for declining, and there was a lot of community feedback from both parents and staff for exactly the reasons Superintendent Kamick was explaining.
Yeah, it wasn't my.
No, I
idea
know. I
that
just
that's
mean
what I want.
that there's history there too, to
Yes.
be able to add on
And
to.
I appreciate that because I'm in schools and as all of you are, and I see the work that's being done by them. And I know how important it is because it, they're doing a lot of student support along with a lot of the other IEP work and all of that. But again, the lens that sometimes our community looks at things because they don't have the information that we have. So I wanted to bring that out so that everybody knows that we're looking at all of it, and that if enrollment goes down, that we will look at those positions and any other positions that we don't feel that we, need anymore.
But all those things are they're scaled
right.
for enrollment.
The other one was about furlough days and how the comment was made to me about furlough days are just like a Band-Aid. And why aren't you just cutting rather than doing furlough days on a continuing basis? So can you kind of shed some light on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And that was a comment that came up from a member of the Budget Advisory Committee as well as, and it was specific to management. Why not consider just drawing back salaries from all the managers across the district? So one of the reasons that I am recommending furlough days is a few things. One, they're temporary in nature. And when we get through this budget storm, those work days can come back and the salary for all of those impacted by furlough days can come back. It does share the pain across all employees of the organization as a response to the need for budget reductions. It shares the pain in a way that it is a percentage of each person's salary. And part of the reason we made the recommendations the way they're presented tonight is that myself and my executive team taking the recommendation for more furlough days than others. There is consideration for just changing salaries. If we talk about that from a labor union standpoint, that obviously has to be negotiated. From the management side, it doesn't, but I would say for all of our employees, that reduction in salary being permanent or ongoing, I think we have to acknowledge that it might lead to a large exodus of people from the district. That's not something that I want to see. There was a time and place where I think San Ramon, when I was here about 10 years ago working in HR, I think there was maybe one district that at the time that beat us in total comp, and I think it was Acalanes. There's a few more districts ahead of us now. And the labor market is such that if you are a school employee, in my opinion, whether classified or certificated, there's work out there for you. And so I think if we look at it's not to say that furlough days wouldn't cause people to look somewhere else, but at least furlough days would be a temporary measure. I think if we made a more permanent measure, we would see people questioning, do they need to look for a different place to work? Because the cost of living in the Bay Area is not going to be any less expensive, and we will fall dramatically below where we are in comparative metrics for total compensation and for salaries. And there's a balance between that. There is consideration for total compensation, which is your salary and your benefits. But when we implemented year for year service credit, many districts followed suit. We did the same thing in Fremont because we thought it was such a good idea. The the implication of many districts doing that has changed the landscape, especially on the certificated side. Because previously, if you were in a district for, let's say, 10 years, most union contracts and district agreements, it's agreement between both parties, stipulated that you could only bring in, let's say, somewhere between 9, 10, 11, or 12 years of service credit. And now that's changed dramatically, and the landscape exists where in most cases, credentialed employees can go anywhere they want in the Bay Area, and the majority of the districts will honor their year-for-year service credit. And so I just think we need to be looking at it from a recruitment and retention standpoint.
Yeah, it does seem like one of those levers you can pull and kind of push back up easier than others.
With the idea of feeling like we need to have that buffer in terms of the cuts that we make, I would also like us to think about a buffer in terms of revenue as well. So we know that there are certain things that we're going to want to do that are going to take time, you know, advocacy at the state level, those types of things. But I think there are some things that we can do in the short term that they may not work, but they might work in terms of just uplifting a little bit more revenue, whether it's around ADA or I don't know if it was Dia or one of the other, Rochelle, one of the social workers talked about the, you know, like the billing of mental health services to Medi-Cal and those types of things. And I know there was a workshop at CSBA around that I'm sure I could grab. I didn't go to it, but I'm sure I could grab. But anyway, so I guess my question with that is, what are we actually doing when it comes to attendance and trying to lift up the ADA? And then what are there things that we can do in addition to that in this short term to maybe help to build a cushion in revenue and not just have to think about the cushion in cuts?
Yeah, we're happy to address that more in the next meeting. I think just in the moment off the cuff, when I think about what we're doing, we have some great work happening through our attendance TSA, where I think this last year we've decreased our chronic absenteeism rate, which is certainly beneficial. The other piece is I compliment Servia for a spirited effort in working to maximize where we can appropriately use independent study contracts to retain the opportunity for ADA when students are absent. And so those action steps can help, but, and we can try and quantify what some of those are projected to be. The thing to remember in terms of ADA is I think if we're right now at 95.5% ADA, and in the prime time pre-COVID days, we were maybe 98%, 99. That 3% difference, 6 million, 7 million.
Which is all of our social emotional
It's
staffing.
it's probably closer to 5. but-
Okay, right. But
Okay.
yeah,
And we can try to quantify the outcomes of increased revenue, and present that as information to the board. And we can certainly look at it as we will work at the pleasure of the board and the direction of the board. What I would say we can characterize how we might project that to be. But I would also say we shouldn't incorporate it into an accounting metric for addressing the 24 million.
no, but I think working towards it, I think is incredibly important. And I know we can't wave a magic wand, but we can certainly have the intention of working harder as best we can, and with the now reduced bandwidth that we will have to be able to at least get closer to pre-pandemic numbers, because we are talking millions of dollars. And another component of that too, which was brought up in public comment, is, you know, really when we're looking at these cuts, looking at the impacts that they have above and, well, I mean, the impacts they have on the students are you know, the bottom line importance, but also the impact that they have on our revenue, the impact that they have on how it affects those left standing, and the workload that they have in the places where we have to kind of not be able to, you know, the places where we have to reduce the support of students, and then the cost on the district to that, right? So that's whether it's chronic absenteeism, whether it's you know, in terms of special education, whether it's, you know, not fully being compliant with the IEP process. And so therefore we're running into a little bit more costs with that, you know, those types of things, taking that into consideration when we're looking at these, we're gutting the district, but let's gut it strategically, right? I guess that's.
And I will also add, in terms of the Medi-Cal billing component, I think we are in one of the work groups in the tier 2 level for the Medi-Cal billing process. And I can reach out to some of my colleagues in different districts. I'm serving on a panel for a CSBA workshop with Parveen Amadi from Castro Valley. Their district was one of the initial groups launching into that process. My recollection, and I don't mean to sound negative, I'm just trying to manage expectations, is that they didn't see the revenue they were expecting to see from it in projections. It doesn't mean that they didn't get any, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it. But I have called out to state and local officials regarding that Medi-Cal billing piece, some of my student privacy concerns around that, because what is really happening is we're billing Medi-Cal for some of the things that we're doing. Some of that might include counseling. And I think we've acknowledged in the room tonight that there might be time and space where a student needs and desires counseling for a broad range of reasons. And I have a concern, not that I want to hide anything from our parent population, I want to be clear about that. But in the Medi-Cal billing process, if you're familiar with how your mail comes in for benefits, you get an EOB, an explanation of benefits. And you could be getting an EOB from your provider that your insurance was billed for something related to your child. And the child might not be ready to talk about that yet. And so we've approached it very cautiously for a number of those reasons. And the state and local officials haven't been able to give us a solid answer on protections against that. And again, it's not a desire to hide things, but there's a lot that happens for kids. And in every case, we want to bring parents into it. There are some cases where a student says that might not be yet safe. And I think our counselors do a great job of working towards arriving at that same safe point where we can bring families into the conversation together.
So could a process be set up so that once the counselor's gotten the okay from the student that it is okay for their parents to know, then it could go through that? You know, so it's sort of like a decision point?
And that's one of the things that we'd have to work out operationally. The challenge is that our staff that is providing these services are going to have to do a tracking log. And it would be an error in a tracking log.
Would have bad consequences. Yeah.
Problematic.
Could have bad.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about a couple of things on the first list? The Speak Up, Be Safe program, which is down there for $175,000. That's a subscription that we have?
It is a contract that we have with the Child Health Prevention Council, and they serve our second graders, our fourth graders, and our sixth graders. And they come into our classrooms a couple times a year and do provide
Okay.
support around physical,
Completely different than what I
emotional.
thought it was. I
Yes.
thought it was the
Safe.
hotline when you see
No,
something,
no,
say
no,
something.
no.
And
This
I
is an
think
actual
someone who
program.
wrote to us thought the same thing.
No.
Okay,
No,
I'm
this
glad
is
I
an
asked the
additional
question.
program to
Okay.
support. Yes.
Okay. We did that a while back and it was about students understanding boundaries and
Yes.
like when they
physical,
could
emotional
report this adult is
safety, how to
making.
report safely
Okay.
to an adult on campus. Absolutely.
Okay, so maybe the person who wrote to us did understand it. It's just I didn't. The other one was the elimination of covering WASC expenses. I didn't know what we meant by WASC expenses. Is that when a staff member is on a WASC team or when our high school is getting its WASC review? The second.
It's
Okay.
the second. Yes.
Okay, so then it would come from site funds?
Potentially or site discretionary. Yes, that's what we would
Okay.
move it to.
Okay. And I guess it's quantified there, so, okay.
I have a question from that list too. I know a couple years ago, 1 or 2 years ago, we went through a process where we were realizing that that we needed to have an additional layer of fingerprinting and kind of investigation as we were hiring new employees. When we look at stop the subsidizing of fingerprinting costs for new employees, are we actually reducing some of the layers that a new employee might have to go through, or is it that they're then required to, it's just a step that they have to take and a payment that they have to make before they can be hired? Is that correct? Can you
Yeah.
explain it?
All of the procedural steps would remain the same. The difference is just who's covering the cost of the fingerprinting. It would fall to the employee.
Is that in practice anywhere else in other districts? Like, what's the more common practice there?
I would have to do some more research on that. As you asked that, I tried to think back to my time in Fremont and Martinez, and I just cannot recall off the top of my head. And the reason I can't recall is because I would say, the last 10 years, a lot of conversation has changed about covering fingerprinting costs for volunteers. And I might be convoluting that with volunteer costs versus employee costs. I don't know if you have a recollection of our time, or Melanie, if you know what other districts might be doing.
Well, certainly, yes. Currently, we cover that amount covers a combination of costs for the volunteer fingerprinting as well as subsidizing portion of the cost for our new employees. But in terms of district, I think the most common practice is that new employees are required to cover the cost of their fingerprints, but it could vary and we could do some research to be sure.
So it's not unheard of.
So one of the other programs that's on the list is the Safe School Ambassadors. Are those in all of our high schools, or is that program only in a couple of them?
No, it is in all of our high schools.
And I've seen how it's made a difference, that they're really running with it, and it seems to be really getting off the ground. Now, if we aren't able to have the contract anymore, is there a way for us to alternatively keep the program going? Maybe we don't get to call it that because we don't have a contract anymore, but we're still teaching the kids and having the kids participate in something like that, and we can call it whatever name we want.
Yes, and our executive director, Debbie Pettish, I want to credit her for beginning work on that as we speak, and moving to a trainer of trainer model in March of what we're currently doing and how we're currently working with the contract, and moving to our own support within the district, and with the hopes of continuing in that program. We're currently trying to find a different way to navigate maybe some smaller costs with the support of our school site and some of their site discretionary, if possible, for next year.
Yeah, that would be great. I think if parents know the kind of impact that those kinds of programs have on the culture of our schools, that we have such a generous community that they would back that for sure. I know I would if I had a kid in school right now. That's great. That's great news that we're actually being able to transfer over some of these things that we were paying for, that we can actually do on our own.
Maybe it could be on the list as bring it in-house or something like that. So it's clearer that it's not cutting it, it's cutting the contract or the relationship.
Yeah, and with that, with that kind of idea of finding solutions, right? Is there, and this sounds like it's one of those times, are there opportunities for us with some of, the programs, but also with, when we think about some of the social workers, some of the work that they do, some of the work that the counselors do, is there opportunities for community partners to kind of help with that, or the county, or I know grants are a heavy lift sometimes and they take a while, and I know that that's again not that magic wand that people like to think it is, but are there opportunities for us to kind of look into that? Have we been looking into that? Is there, I know we have a great relationship with Skip Counseling, and I know that, but mental health is a big deal nationally and in the state, with funding being put to that, and maybe there's a way for us to.
I can't speak to what we've maybe looked at before I was hired in July, and I can certainly review that with the team. I think there may be some opportunity there. I don't want to say that there wouldn't be. I think we will need to just work closely with our labor partners in SRVUSD to ensure that we're not infringing upon their members' rights to do the work of those job classifications. But to the extent that we can find additional partnerships, I think we want to keep looking for those, because there are some that exist, and if we can tap into some of those. We had a similar arrangement in my prior district, which was a good community support. So we can see what we can find.
In the spirit of creating this buffer list, as Laura described it, I would like for us to be able to separate the elementary class size reduction into a K3 and a 4-5 separate line item, if that would be possible. So we, because it has to be quantified. And I
We
think
can
that
work on
aligns
separating that.
with LCFF. So I think it's an important.
really good.
And can I just clarify K3, 4,
Well,
5?
because isn't TK already has a mandated ratio? So that's why I said K3 and 4.
Yep. We can pull that data.
So I guess another question that I have is if we, when we identify this $24+ million in cuts, that gives us time during the 25-26 school year to examine the zero-based budgeting idea and kind of build back off of that. Is that enough of an on-ramp for looking at something like that?
I would suggest, I don't know that it's enough time, but my suggestion would be that as soon as possible. And I know this is a big ask for a lot of members who've been supportive of the Budget Advisory Committee, a lot of our staff and community that have been a partner in that, and a lot of work for our business team. But I would say as soon as we adopt a reduction list and acknowledging that the bulk of the work from there, I don't want to say a bulk of the impact, but the lift after we adopt the reduction list falls to the HR team to prepare the bumping, the layoffs, manage the negotiations process. But as soon as we have bandwidth and even in that process, I would suggest that we start scheduling workshops for the board, engaging community partners, engaging our staff, and start the zero-based budgeting process right away in conjunction with beginning to study how we can leverage property and who we can partner with, because I don't know how long of an on-ramp we need, but I have a clear sense that we need the change faster than the on-ramp.
Yeah, and that's my concern too, even in this talk, because my desire is to whittle this down to as close to as our minimum that we have to cut as possible to buy us time to really see what is going. The Debbie Downer side of me says that unless something dramatically changes in the positive and quickly, that we've got millions of more dollars of cuts to achieve a balanced budget. And then the more Pollyannish side of me is like, maybe something will happen. But when I budget for Debbie Downer side. And that's the difficulty in this. And I think calling that out is the reality for everybody in the room and everybody watching too. We're trying to do this in a thoughtful way where we're not biting off more than we have to. But I think the reality is, unless there's a dramatic change, we want a balanced budget, and I don't want to operate at a razor thin margin. And so there's likely more to come.
And I kind of wonder if that process of actually doing that is what really gives you the ammunition to go make the case to our legislators, our senators, and on up. Because I think we all agree that the logic of the LCFF makes sense, but the fundamental flaw is that the base doesn't fund a basic education. And everybody who has supplemental is stretching it however they can to basically pay for basics and a little bit more. And if you have concentration, it's the same. So it's like we're pretending to do the LCFF the way it's intended to be. But you have to start with an adequate base and then you add on. Otherwise, it's very similar to trying to do an RTI pyramid upside down, where you're intervening for everyone instead of just providing really good tier 1 instruction. I mean, the tier 1 is like the base, and then the other tiers are like the other tiers of LCFF, and they've got it backwards. And you go to a statewide meeting and you talk about this stuff and everybody just says, we need to change the tiers. We need more supplemental, but that's not the structure. And it's broken, and we need to demonstrate you can't fund the base with the base.
And to piggyback on that, our district is in an area that's one of the most expensive to live in and one of the most expensive for goods and services and salaries. Yet we're given the same amount of money as districts who are in different areas that have much lower costs, even in California. So that's another inequity that has not ever been considered in the LCFF. And more of that is coming out as, our property values go up and it's more expensive to live here. And people come here because they want their kids in our schools. Yet here we are struggling to try to provide what it is that they're paying these high prices for.
Right, exactly.
So it's like this vicious cycle, and trying to find a way out of it is incredibly frustrating because it feels like, I don't know if this is really true, but it feels like the people in our legislature don't understand public education and what we're dealing with. And now that we have only two left who were there when the LCFF was invented, we're going to have a tough road to hoe on that one, I think. But I'm willing to do my part, and I will try to get in front of our legislators. I'm going to partner with the teachers to phone bank and do everything I can to try to change this. But it's, as we talked about, it's not going to be instant. And I do have that little part of me that's Pollyanna.
Yeah.
I work in the tech business, and tech is on fire right now, and it's fueling the state's coffers. I'm hoping that those capital gains that people are paying for all of the money that they've reaped on their stocks is going to give the state a little boost. I don't think it's going to be the answer to all our problems, but maybe there'll be a little extra left over that we might get. I'm not banking on that, and I agree that we're going to have some sort of tiered or more than just the 24 million, but I still have a little faith left.
Can I ask a kind of a operational or logistical question? How do we decide who gets pink slips? Like, how does that, what's that process?
So pretty much in every case, it's going to be based on seniority, last in, first out. And that's provided within the ed code and I don't have them committed to memory, but in our bargaining contracts as well. So it's pretty much always determined based on seniority. The caveats to that would be seniority within a position in the classified ranks. If you held a position before, you'd bump back. And so there's a bumping effect that happens within classified positions. From the certificated side, it can also be dependent on what you're credentialed in. When we bring forward what we call a PKS, a particular kind of service, which is the legal term for it, but a reduction list, we bring forward criteria for tie breaking. Because a district has to establish if people are hired on the same seniority date, by what would we break the criteria? Oftentimes, criteria is dependent on other years of service, other credentialing. If the person is teaching, let's say, a fifth grade class, but they also have a BCLAD, that could be tie-breaking criteria. And so, in large part, I would say it's going to all be always based on seniority from the SRVUSD, SEIU, and CSEA side. With caveats for bumping and maybe some unique credentialing aspects. For the management side, it's not necessarily seniority driven. It's based on the position, and people do have, depending on their prior work experience and credentials, opportunity to move into other positions, but it's not as seniority driven on the management side.
And then in the case of the woman who spoke in public comment about her position, where does that fit into this, given that she had a shift in title?
Yeah, Melanie can add to this, but it would fall within seniority within the job classification. When and how the title changed, I don't know, but the way the classified salary schedule works, generally with each position and a move up to the next level, there's a range with each position associated with it. It's generally about a 2.5% increase in range. And so those titles often are associated with a range. I don't know the particulars of this individual circumstance and if there was a change in range, why there was a change in title. But it does fall within the bargaining agreement to be seniority within the job classification. And then your seniority with other job classification determines your bumping rates. Am I missing something there?
I have one more question on the reduction of a 0.5 facilities use coordinator. Does that limit our ability to then rent out our facilities and have revenue? Or are those two completely separate things?
Those are the same positions. We currently have two FTE that currently take those reservations. And so the proposal here was to reduce it down to 1.5.
Okay.
And then we have to figure out from there if with the, at the negotiations table with the union, how the work would continue and what it would look like.
Yeah, and I do kind of wonder if, you know, we're saving $78,000, but then saying no to certain rentals, if we're now just talking about, you know, a much smaller amount, and it just seems insignificant. But that's one that if we're looking at revenue at the same time and the impact of it.
Yeah, I want to touch base on that. I think it would be helpful for us, at least as a board, to get more data on some of these unexpected costs that might be incurred. I feel like, you know, we do these things with the right intentions, and I know that we're really fighting for every single penny we can save. But I'm worried. I mean, we talked about this earlier when it came to things like maintenance or our student attendance review board, or even our technician roles, right? If we're just for contracting outwards now instead to fill that gap, right? Or if we're having a decline in ADA and that also costs us money, it's like, it would be very helpful for us if we had at least some quantifiable data or at least some predictions as to how it might impact our expenses as a district, so we can get a better estimate of where we're at for our next couple meetings.
I think Travis, that's a good point, and we can certainly work on that. And again, I don't mean to be overly negative, but I think one of the things we have to recognize with the magnitude of these budget reductions is there's I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I think for a lack of a better term, there's going to be a reckoning when it's done. And that reckoning is the point at which we will establish that, which is why I'm suggesting there's a little bit of a buffer, because many of the effects of these decisions from the classified side are subject to the bargaining table. On the certificated side, some of the decisions are subject to the bargaining table. And in the end, we have to recalibrate, is probably the more appropriate word than reckoning. We have to recalibrate everything that we're doing and who's going to do it. And some of the things are going to fall off the list. And so I acknowledge the rationale for that data and the importance of that data, but I also want to manage expectations, because I don't want the team to create data that is overly misleading or false. I've told our leadership team, one of the things that we have to do after this January meeting is, and I think we have to do this across the district, but the leadership team needs to lead it, which is to say, what are we going to prioritize in terms of getting done? A great example is we have 6 fantastic coordinators right now that are all doing amazing work for students and staff in our schools. If we move to reduce those into 3, all of that, the 100% of the work done by 6 coordinators cannot be done by 3 people. And so we're going to have to recalibrate. And that probably is the point, Travis, where we have the decision of saying, okay, what's just no longer going to get done? And are there cases, as you're describing, where we might need to outsource something? Generally, we don't outsource because it's more expensive, but I'd be oversimplifying if I just said it never happened. So there's a recalibration that has to happen, but I don't know that we can really quantify it until we have the approved list and sit down and say what can't get done anymore.
Anybody have any other closing comments, questions?
I would love to just see if I'm getting a little bit of sense of direction from the board.
Okay.
If I think back to the conversation that the board has engaged in tonight, and I want to thank the board for having this conversation. I shared with a number of people that I know the plan's full of bad ideas and there are things I don't want to recommend. But I told a number of individuals. I don't know what the board yet thinks because this is the only venue where I can engage with the board in discussion around these reduction plans. And if I think about the conversation, which I think has been great tonight, and I appreciate all the public comment that's come forward, it sounds like we want a tiered list that I'm going to paraphrase here, and you can tell me if I should adjust, that goes to 38 million, but draws the line at 24 plus the appropriate buffer. And what I gathered from the conversation, while not voting on it as a board, I gathered there was significant concern about the reduction of counseling and social workers, and how we consider student mental health and student safety within these reductions. The request that we break up the class size increase proposals to K3 and 4-5. And I think staff can go back and create some a tiered list, and I'm going to push our team to come up with some different scenarios too, so that not only is there one tiered list for the board to look at, but a few different versions of how things could be constructed given some of the board feedback. And I think that also, much like tonight, gives the board an opportunity to either say, I like the tiered list of option A, I like the tiered list in option B, or within the construct of the meeting, which has happened in another district for me before, reconstruct A and B together to create tiered list C. So I think we have pretty good direction if that meets the spirit of the feedback for the board today.
Yeah, and as far as what this looks like in January, we have to make decisions on what and vote on what that list is. And we'll be able to do that even with reconstructing a tiered list in the meeting. We can action on that.
Yeah, so I've had that happen in other districts before, and the board is engaged in some rich dialogue around, you know, let's say a trustee were to say, I can support everything on tiered version A, except I want to pull in something in tier version B, and I want to make a swap. We can certainly do that as a board in the meeting. And if there is not consensus there and the board feels like there's more time, we can schedule another special meeting and make the decision fairly soon after. I would highlight that we need to be so what I'm looking at, sorry, if not being fully transparent on what I'm looking at, when we submit our first interim to the county office always gives us a letter back to the district regarding their opinion of our first interim. So the county has advised us that they are approving our first interim, but they are approving it with significant caution. And so they are directing that we prepare a fiscal solvency plan, a budget reduction plan, that includes a detailed report, which would be our budget reduction list, to them by January 31st. So operationally for our HR team and the collective bargaining that has to happen, 14th would be ideal. And we can look at multiple lists and reconstruct some in that meeting and still take action. And if the board needed another meeting, we could schedule a special meeting. I would just say we should schedule it pretty quickly because the negotiations are critical. The preparation for any layoff notices are very critical. And then we need to get the information to the county office by the 31st.
And I would also ask that to Travis's point that we if there's an opportunity for you guys to kind of look at some of the impact of some of the more specific cuts in terms of what the impact would be on revenue and on workload too, from a certain extent.
Yeah, it's more, I think it's like trying to look around the corner after you initially come up with these, then sort of trying to look around to see what the unintended, I mean, nobody has a crystal ball, I get that, but trying to see what the unintended consequences might be that might not make that the best decision, or maybe it is. But I think we've really had to push this forward pretty quickly because of the situation that we're in. And so it's a lot to ask for all of you because you've worked so hard. And I want to say how much I appreciate everything that all of you have done, especially Danny Hillman and our superintendent on compiling this list, because this is not easy and it's not something that any of us have the depth of knowledge to do. And so we depend on your counsel, and I'm totally comfortable with that. So if you can provide us with some of that, that would be great. I know it's a lot to ask, but we're just trying to turn over every rock that we can to find out, where we're going to be.
But I would definitely say, I think the tiering and the thinking around that is a higher priority than
For sure.
these little tiny margins and trying to look into your crystal balls.
Yeah, and I think the BAC did that to a certain extent of asking some of those questions that then I think mostly informed this list. I think the tiered approach, I would suggest as an individual trustee to wrap in some of those thought processes into that tiered approach, because I know we're on a time crunch. I know it's the holidays coming up, and I know we gotta get at this. So I kind of echo what you're saying.
And I wanted to add one more thing. I think the communications about all of this have been above and beyond outstanding. From what we received, what the community received, the engagement we have tonight. I mean, you could not ask for more thoughtfulness and more transparency, and I really applaud you for that. All of you, as I know you've been working on it for months. Look,
Okay, so you have what you need, Superintendent Kamick?
I do. Thank you to the board, and I acknowledge and thank all of the staff that have been a part of preparing for tonight's meeting, and the business team for the calculations and the work, the executive team, and thanks to our labor partners. While I know that there is a lot that needs to be done still, they have been open for discussion and dialogue throughout this process, and I remain hopeful that that continues. And I really want to compliment the board. This is a tough subject, and I think the questions you asked were very thoughtful and highlight the fact that there is universal care for our students and our staff, and we're going to try and make it through this really difficult time in the best manner possible. The scope of reductions feels inhumane. I think the best we can do is try and make it as humane as we possibly can. So thank you to the board.
So before I close the meeting, once again, I want to thank all of our community, staff, students for being here tonight to give us your perspective and your understanding. It's very, very valuable to me as a board member. And with that, I adjourn the meeting.